Women's shoes made of very soft and thin leather, decorated with natural precious stones, stepped carefully along the corridors of the mansion. The owner of these shoes, without a name, urgently needed to find out all the gossip about herself and her favorites. Only accurate information could help her leave the world of the virtual game and return home, from the reverse harem to the familiar and native world. Here she was known as Lady Ailsden, one of the first beauties of the empire, heiress to the title and incredible wealth. Not all of it, of course, but certainly a significant part of it. The sharp heel nervously beat out a favorite melody, and its owner turned all loud. The girl was pleased that her intention quickly became public knowledge. This played into her hands. The socialite ladies and their gentlemen told each other the main news of the day. The true heiress of the Duke of Ailsden's house, renowned for her beauty, education, and refined manners. A girl whose admirers include the most handsome, intelligent, and rich men of the empire. This is a beautiful and dangerous lady, a trendsetter and a maker of destinies. Her skin is soft as silk, her lips are pink as coral, and her teeth are white as pearls. There she is, walking past, her head held high and looking through the crowd surrounding her. This is Natalie Ayland, the most talked about figure in social and political circles. There are persistent rumors that Lady Natalie has decided to find herself a husband. To this end, she is now organizing a selection of candidates. The winner will take the place of Lady Ayland's companion and become her husband. Many did not believe that these rumors were true. They were too dubious. Natalie Ayland, in the eyes of society, was too proud and independent to want to marry. Natalie's sweet smile had not fooled anyone for a long time. This woman did nothing for no reason. In general, they were right. Natalie planned this marriage to get out of the reverse harem. Many people spoke to Natalie about her incredible generosity and magnanimity. She gave all the men in the empire an equal chance to become her husband. Isn't that a generous act? Men believed that even just seeing Lady Ayland's face was already good luck, and becoming her husband was an incredible happiness. Everyone envied the lucky man in advance. But Natalie remembered well that just recently, all these people had a completely opposite opinion of her. They pointed at it and called it a poisonous toadstool and a crow. Until recently, Natalie was practically an outcast. Now, all the same people smile sweetly at her and flatter her until she's hoarse. However, all this was insignificant. It was not at all for the sake of the crowd's opinion that Natalie was going to get married. The girl smiled sweetly but distantly at the applicants and said that applications would only be accepted tomorrow, and then they would be able to show what they were capable of. In fact, the reason why Natalie decided to marry her husband is unknown even to her family. Natalie was called out by her adoptive sister. The girl was nervous and looked restless. The Duke's adopted daughter, Sharon Ailsden, was concerned that Natalie's father and older brother had not given their consent to the marriage, and that she was in too much of a hurry to begin the selection process. Natalie pulled her sister behind the nearest screen to talk privately. Here, in a loud whisper, Natalie informed Sharon that she had got it all wrong. In fact, Natalie doesn't need to ask anyone for permission. She's already matured enough. Leaning close to her adopted sister's ear, Natalie announced that she was looking for a husband for herself, not for her brother or father. Sharon was shocked by Natalie's straightforwardness. She was not so confident in herself and her status. Many things in Sharon's life did not come as easily to her as they did to Natalie. It was indecent to object and argue. There were too many guests around. Sharon attempted to make small talk with the guests, trying to assume the role of hostess of the ball. Natalie interrupted her sister abruptly and asked why she didn't go to her father. Sharon had always given in to Natalie, and now she quickly apologized. She quickly turned to the door and, without saying goodbye, left the room. Lady Ayland, the girl who had everything, had only one reason to marry, one and only one. Only this reason made her place an advert looking for a husband. Natalie told everyone that she also wanted to get married, and that her competition was fair and open to all suitors. Here came those because of whom she made this decision. There were 3 of them. The appearance of these men made Natalie lose her composure, but only for a split second. The girl could not understand why all 3 were so happy. Did they really think that she started this out of jealousy and a desire to receive a marriage proposal? The noble lady's man and crown prince, whose level of sympathy for Natalie reached a maximum of 100%, approached her first. The young man had long suspected something was wrong. All the women considered him a rake, but only she remained next to him. The rest, as the prince believed, Natalie skillfully removed from the way. In Natalie's opinion, the prince was talking absolute nonsense, not worthy of her attention. The first high-born admirer was followed by a second, a young man who was delighted to meet him. The man assumed that Natalie had a good reason for calling him a monster. It was the cruel Duke of the North, with a level of sympathy for Natalie that was still the same maximum 100%. The third reason, or rather the third man, did not take long to appear. He was tender and clingy, accusing the girl of taming him like a puppy, and now she must take responsibility. She herself told him that if you cry and cling, you can win a woman's heart. This crybaby is actually a psychopathic mage and the Lord of the Dark Tower, and he also has a maximum of 100% sympathy for Natalie. The mage couldn't bear the thought of Natalie looking at others. He hadn't been tamed to be abandoned. In reality, Natalie was in a reverse harem game world where the winner was the one who won the affections of the male characters. The game was not for the faint of heart. This virtual reality game was positioned for ages 18 plus. Natalie loved this kind of entertainment. Until recently, of course, when she became the main character. To exit the game, you had to fill the love scale of all the main characters to a certain level, and when it reached 100%, the final scene would start with one of them. Natalie thought that she had fulfilled all the conditions, but she did not notice that 3 characters had a 100% love for her at once. Because of this, the system glitched, and the exit from the game was not activated. The girl was angry with herself. If she had installed the update where there was an ending where everyone lived together, she would have been freed long ago. An idea came into Natalie's head that would help her escape from this world. In this game, male characters' affection levels dropped when they were jealous or felt cheated. The idea was to marry not one of the 3 main characters, but a 4th one and sharply reduce their sympathy towards her. However, this turned out to be not such a simple matter. Contrary to all her expectations, her brother, Anatole Ailsden, appeared and declared that he saw no reason for Natalia to marry so hastily. She was too naive and did not understand anything about life. Natalie was horrified, not only that the 3 main characters went crazy from obsession with her person, now even her own brother, who just recently was angry and yelling at Natalie, suddenly became concerned about her fate. The girl could not understand why Anatole, who had recently wanted to get rid of her as a worthless burden, was now furious about her decision to marry. Why did the brother value his sister so much? Something was clearly wrong. What had changed him so much? The girl was interested in. And her father also got involved. The Duke of Ailsden tried to persuade his daughter to give up the idea of marriage and stay at home. Daddy promised that his daughter would squander her father's inheritance as she pleased for the rest of her days. The father, who used to look at her like a cobblestone by the road, now doesn't want to let her go at all. The game was glitching more and more, and the sympathy of those around her, which she had previously desired, irritated Natalie. Every day, she wanted more and more to go home, to her room, littered with energy drink cans. The shoes were thrown off as unnecessary. I just wanted to slap my feet barefoot on the floor. Natalie looked at the night park for a while. The sight was beautiful and mesmerizing, but it didn't make the girl happy at all. A decision to immediately end all this matured in her head. Natalie is tired of trying to make everyone love her like she's a $100 bill. It seemed like it was a long time ago, when the game was completely beyond her control, trying to throw her into hell. The marble of the balcony felt cold on her bare feet. Natalie walked to the very edge. Memories overwhelmed her. The girl recalled how she was bullied for wearing a wig and copying Sharon. The girl was also subjected to contemptuous ridicule because her own family did not pay her due attention. At that time, Natalie felt like a lonely and abandoned little girl. She was firmly convinced that no one else would ever love her. When everything changed and Natalie had this incredible stroke of luck, Natalie herself didn't quite understand it. Everything happened so quickly and unexpectedly that the girl simply lost her head and control over events. Of course, she tried very hard and secretly hoped that everything would change. But in the end, nothing changed at all. Bitter tears began to drip from Natalie's eyes. They, like everything in this world, were not real. Just as virtual was this huge moon, hanging sadly high in the sky above Natalie's head. Her first stroke of luck came when she wanted to buy a hat in Madame Dupre's shop. The girl was suddenly called out by the store owner herself and approached with an unexpected proposal. Madame offered to buy her a hat from a limited collection that Natalie had long dreamed of. The girl met the proposal with caution and distrust. Madame Dupre remembered that Natalie had been waiting for this hat for 3 whole months. Suddenly, the shop owner remembered that Natalie had paid her to be put on the preliminary list, asked her to wait, and went to the back room to get some goods. Natalie became interested in another model and asked how much it cost. In fact, the girl didn't need hats at all. Natalie was told that the model she was interested in was an accessory for a mannequin made by Madame Dupre. It had no great commercial value. Didn't she want to become the owner of a hat from a limited edition collection? The girl decided to take the one that was on the mannequin, even though the super fashionable one was now unavailable to her. The rules of the game were strict: one hat for one person. Natalie said that the black hat on the mannequin was exactly what she wanted and asked the salespeople to hurry. The store owner and her employees sighed long and languidly as they looked at Natalie's choice. They tried to persuade the girl to take any other one of her choice, but Natalie remained adamant and ended up with a cute but very simple black hat. When the girl was asked why she chose her, she could not clearly define her feelings. Natalie just liked this particular hat. She could not give any other answer. This whole situation shocked both Madame Dupre herself and everyone who learned about it later. Natalie really didn't know why she did it, but the little black hat really attracted her. It was asking to be taken into her hands. A few days later, on one of the sunny summer days, when everything was blooming and singing, Natalie was having tea with one of her friends, Lady Simpson. Simpson told her that there had been a fire in Madame Dupre's shop the previous night. The store burned to the ground. Absolutely nothing was left. Not a single board, not a piece of fabric. This news shocked Natalie. There were too many coincidences concerning her luck, or rather, lack of it. A massive fire that turned the entire store into ashes and left only memories. A black hat bought by Natalie, which the saleswoman mistook for a regular sample, but it turned out to be from another limited collection. The store was no longer there. The entire collection burned down, and Natalie's copy turned out to be the only one of its kind. Madame Dupre's misfortune turned into Natalie's incredible good fortune. This case was not the only one. After the fire, the brilliant Madame Dupre announced her retirement, and Natalie became the owner of her last masterpiece. Because of this incident, the whole city started talking about Natalie as a lucky girl. Soon she was invited to a private party at the racetrack, where not everyone has access. An incredibly kind young man offered Natalie to bet on the same horse as he did. The young man convinced the girl that this bet would pay off, because the horse was very talented. The guy drew the young duchess's attention to his dear favorite. It was a very beautiful white horse, and the young man said that even professional players bet on it. The young man noticed that this horse was very energetic and looked very much like a real champion. Next to the white horse, there is a black stallion, which attracted the girl's attention more. Natalie asked what the guy could say about him. The horse was quite good. The young man replied that this stallion looked fragile and no one was paying attention to him. So he was a complete hopelessness, and you should bet on the white one. Natalie decided that she would bet on the black one, and no one could convince her otherwise. The companion tried to do this and stated that this bet would be stupid, and the lady would only suffer unnecessary losses. People around her began to gossip that Natalie was a real stubborn woman and only wanted to attract attention to herself. They were right. She always tried to attract as much attention to herself as possible. This should have been obvious when she started dyeing her hair the same color as Lady Sharon, her adopted sister. Natalie placed her bet and waited impatiently for the race to begin, placing her hopes on the horse. The gong sounded, and the competition began. The horses rushed to the finish line. Natalie regretted her impulsiveness a little. Perhaps she should have bet on white. The girl's stubbornness was explained by the fact that those present had already begun to whisper about her. If she retreated, she would become an even bigger laughingstock. Unexpectedly, Natalie heard that the stallion she had bet on had won. Natalie's companion was surprised that Lady Ailsden had guessed so well, since this was her first time attending the races. Natalie didn't know what to say in response to the admiration for her intuition. The girl just liked this horse. He was beautiful. In fact, the horse Natalie chose was a rare wild stallion with excellent speed characteristics. After winning at the racetrack, Many nobles continued to treat Natalie with irony. The girl received the nickname Lightning Fast Lady Luck. This moment finally tipped the scales of fortune in Natalie's favor. Natalie's business began to improve, and she received more and more invitations to dinner parties. And then one day, the very thing she was waiting for most of all came. It was the biggest catch since Natalie's debut. Of course, all these invitations were not sincere expressions of sympathy for the girl. But at that moment, she was quite satisfied with everything. Natalie was calm about her rating in the game and about the further development of events. Until now, all the attention and favor of those around her belonged to Sharon. Natalie decided to take advantage of the chance that Providence had given her, a chance to be loved as much as her sister Sharon. Natalie decided to take advantage of every opportunity that came her way. Natalie found herself in the hands of another invitation to a high society party. The girl thought that this event would be great. It would be possible to have a fun time. A week later, Natalie attended Viscount Rhinefield's masquerade ball. The girl expected a lot from this evening. She bought a new dress especially for attending this masquerade. Of all the invitations she received, Natalie chose this particular party for one simple reason. It was an exclusive event, organized by the Rhinefeld family and open only to a select few. Natalie's attendance at this event will not cause objections from her brother and father, and perhaps the girl will be able to make some useful contacts. In addition, a special auction was announced. Natalie looked out the window. Just a second ago, it had been light and sunny here. Suddenly, the girl was overcome with terrible fear. Her skin broke out in goosebumps. Her hands began to tremble. But it was too late to retreat. She had already sent her consent to the invitation. If she retreated, she would again become the object of ridicule, and her rating would go down. However, even the thought of going to the masquerade began to unsettle Natalie. The girl decided to spit on everything and stay at home. The bad weather raged in earnest. All that was left was to be glad for the safety of the terribly expensive and terribly chic dress, which was supposed to make a splash at today's masquerade. Although Natalie didn't have the strength to rejoice, she suddenly developed a headache. Rainy nights like these always made Natalie feel out of place. Every rainy night, Natalie had the same dream. A little defenseless girl found herself in the rain in an unfamiliar place. The child cried inconsolably, standing in the pouring rain. The girl looked very familiar, but Natalie couldn't remember who she was. No matter how hard she tried, her memory refused to provide the correct answer. Suddenly, Natalie smelled something burning. Someone lit a fire in the Duke's mansion. Or the mansion itself is on fire. For some reason, Natalie found herself on the floor, far from the bed. The girl's arm hurt a lot, although she did not see the reason for this pain. It dawned on Natalie that it couldn't be so quiet in a burning mansion full of servants, and there was absolute silence all around. The girl tried to look out the door, but she was again overcome by an all-consuming feeling of unbearable horror. Having overcome this feeling, Natalie went out into the corridor. What she saw was terrible. Right in front of her door, her brother lay lifeless. A little further on, in a pool of blood, Natalie discovered her father's body. Despair overwhelmed the girl. A cry of horror escaped her throat. Natalie protested against such a development of events. The girl screamed and woke up in a cold sweat. The dream was too real and left a heavy mark on the girl's soul. Even then, Natalie began to suspect that something strange was happening with the game. The loud voice of the brother was heard throughout the palace. He was calling Natalie, and apparently had been looking for her for a long time. The brother was angry. Natalie was in her room all the time and did not respond. The girl replied that she had a headache and fell asleep. The guy was surprised that she really slept and didn't go to the masquerade ball. Natalie replied that she had indeed stayed home and fallen asleep. The girl did not understand why her brother was so nervous. The young man explained that at the masquerade that Natalie wanted to go to, they discovered that substances were prohibited. Natalie didn't understand what her brother wanted to say. The brother explained that everyone who was at the masquerade today was detained and put in the imperial prison. These drugs are prohibited by imperial law, so anyone who was there will be punished for treason. Natalie was the only one who escaped charges and arrest. All three coincidences: purchasing a unique hat at a low price, a big win at the racetrack when a girl bets on a black horse and wins. The sudden illness that allowed Natalie to avoid being charged with treason played into Natalie's hands. The only thing that bothered the girl was the dream she had the day before. her dead brother lying face down at the door of her room. A little further on is the bloody body of the father, with his head almost severed. Natalie, without explaining anything, grabbed her brother's hand, squeezing his limb tightly. The girl said that they should get out of here as soon as possible. If they don't leave now, something terrible will happen. Anatole asked if Natalie had finally realized what a mess she had made. The Duke's son had long been trying to explain to his sister that she was not acting according to the rules, but only now did it seem to him that she was beginning to understand something. Natalie couldn't understand what her mistake and guilt was. Anatole angrily replied that Natalie had responded to the invitation, declaring that she would definitely go to this masquerade. But to whom? To that scoundrel Rainfield. How many times could one talk about caution? Natalie had to remember that there were two Rainfields in the capital. Natalie was stunned. She sent a reply to Viscount Rainfield, and not to that swindler that her brother had just reminded her of. Anatole demanded an explanation as to why Natalie's reply was sent to a scoundrel with a criminal past and present. The girl was surprised to hear that all messages to this man in the Empire were being monitored, and after that, her father and brother immediately received a summons to the Imperial Chancellery. Natalie was very impressed by the mistake that happened to her, because she was very careful. Just in case, she asked the butler to strictly control the invitations she received and to immediately refuse all messages from suspicious individuals. The girl was sure that the butler was a reliable person, and his control would protect her from an accidental mistake. This is exactly what she tried to prove to her brother. Anatole refused to believe his sister, and assumed that she had deliberately stolen the invitation from the swindler, from those that the butler had thrown out, and written a response to it. The brother was sure that Natalie was desperately trying to create trouble on purpose. Anatole was furious. He was always irritated by the wig that Natalie wears to look like Sharon. Now he categorically declared that it was time to get rid of it. The young man reached out his hand to his sister's head. Natalie tried to stop him, but it was all in vain. Anatole tore the wig off his sister's head, indignantly declaring that it was time for her to stop imitating Sharon. Natalie stood in front of her brother, confused, and couldn't understand what to do now. The girl had become so accustomed to this wig that she felt unprotected without it, as if her clothes had been torn off and she had been exposed naked for all to see. The wig was thrown to the floor by Anatole. Natalie felt that by refusing this thing, she would be betraying her best friend. The girl whispered quietly and desperately that her brother had no idea what this wig meant to her. Despair splashed in the girl's eyes. Her brother knew nothing about her at all. Natalie's mother was a fragile and sickly woman who died when the girl was not even 3 years old. The light went out, family happiness ended. The father may have loved his daughter, but he didn't know how to show it, and the child grew up lonely and abandoned. In addition, the mother's last wish was to order her father to take care of the orphaned daughter of her best friend. Natalie greeted the new family member with caution. The girl was her age and looked quite friendly. Natalie asked what the girl's name was. The new girl replied that her name was Sharon. She was the same age as Natalie and offered her friendship. Now the Duke of Aylesden officially had 2 daughters, but the problem was that Sharon began to take things and people from Natalie that belonged to her. The adopted daughter drew Anatole's attention to herself. She often asked him to help her with her studies, although there was no great need for it. The Duke of Aylesden even began to take Sharon with him on business trips. He believed that it was only thanks to her that they were going well. Natalie's father and brother had never been so kind to her, although the girl tried to do everything in her power to make them love her. However, she was haunted by strange misfortunes. One day, in her presence, her father's favorite porcelain broke. Natalie didn't touch him and was completely sure that just a second ago, everything was in perfect order. The maid did not believe her and humbly asked Natalie not to do it again, because the servants would be scolded and punished for it. The more Natalie tried, the worse things became. One day she went shopping and was mistaken for a thief. The Duke was annoyed. Natalie had caused them trouble again. Again, Anatole looked at her with indignation and disdain, but Natalie was not guilty of anything. Sharon seemed to sympathize with her and suggested that if she explained everything to her father, the Duke might understand. By this point, Natalie had already become embittered with her foster sister and sharply told her not to meddle in something that wasn't her business. Anatole sharply scolded Natalie for being rude to Sharon. The girl became even more offended by her brother and withdrew into herself completely. The young Duke promised Sharon that he would punish Natalie himself later, and urged her not to be too upset. Sharon replied that it was nothing to worry about. She had long been accustomed to Natalie's harsh attitude towards her. An indignant Anatole turned to his father with a demand to find some way out of the current situation and to rein in Natalie. The Duke categorically refused to follow his son's demand, reminding him of some incident known only to both of them and what happened when strict measures were taken. Anatole replied that he remembered everything well and would not insist any longer. Even Sharon could not understand what these two meant. Natalie's state of alienation from her family was aggravated by idle gossips who constantly discussed all members of her family. It was said that the men of House Ailsden were chosen by the god of light and had a light aura, but Lady Natalie had no powers. Natalie listened to such speeches and became unbearably sad. The ladies put forward a terrible assumption. For some reason, they decided that the late Duchess, Natalie's mother, had the same green eyes as Sharon. Based on the fictitious fact, they whispered that the adopted girl was Natalie and the biological daughter was Sharon. Hearing this, the girl cried from despair and resentment. Even though Natalie was ignored and treated poorly by her family and friends, she still wanted to be loved by them, like Sharon. The girl understood that black hair did not suit her, but perhaps it would help her improve her relationship with her relatives. Anatole didn't want to hear anything about this and angrily trampled Natalie's wig with his feet. The girl's desperate cries only increased the young Duke's anger. At this time, Sharon entered the room and called Anatole in a quiet voice. Sharon stood at the very entrance to the room, her face showing that she was guilty and would humbly accept any punishment. The girl admitted that she had messed up the invitations. She didn't know that the butler had already sorted them, and she had collected everything together for the answer. Sharon offered Natalie her sincere apologies. She felt sorry that her sister could suffer because of her. For Natalie, this state of affairs was new. It was not her fault. Someone else was to blame, and, most importantly, everyone would find out about it now. Anatole was not at all angry with Sharon. He calmly extended his hand to the girl. The young Duke told her not to worry too much. It was an accident, and Natalie still needed to be more careful. Everything in Natalie rebelled, which means she is still the main villain for her brother, and Sharon simply made a mistake. The girl threw accusations at her brother's back that everyone in this house was only kind to Sharon. Her mistakes were trivial, while Natalie's mistakes were a universal catastrophe. Anatole responded sharply that no one expected anything from Natalie except disasters. The brother ordered his sister to stay in her room and think about her behavior. Anatole quickly left the room, leaving the girls alone. Sharon urged Natalie not to be upset with her brother. The girl was convinced that Anatole's harshness was explained only by the fact that he was worried about Natalie and concerned about her future. Sharon's angelic face and her quiet, gentle voice irritated Natalie. Sharon tried to calm Natalie down by taking her hand. This only made the situation worse. Natalie just went wild and angrily screamed that this was her brother, not Sharon, and this was her home and her family. Sharon was scared of Natalie and almost fainted. At this time, a maid unexpectedly entered the room and witnessed a scandalous situation. Sharon tried to calm Natalie's hysteria and talk to her. The maid advised the lady to leave and not complicate the situation. Offended by the whole world, Natalie was left completely alone. She didn't want to live anymore. She was too tired of being ignored and angry with her family. The door to the balcony was open and beckoning, promising deliverance from all troubles and problems in one very simple way. Natalie climbed onto the railing, feeling that if she died, everyone would only be better off. But it wouldn't make any difference to her. Nobody needs her anyway. Her only desire was to be loved, at least once. But apparently this desire is unrealizable. Natalie's family has two daughters. One is loved by everyone. The other is like a crow. Obviously, which one is preferred? One, real and loved by all, will be quite enough, Natalie firmly decided. Perhaps right now she will do what they want most of all: disappear. Suddenly, an otherworldly voice called out to Natalie. Had she really forgotten everything? Natalie must remember and understand that this is an unreal world. This is a virtual game in which a girl must increase her rating and gain points. Natalie came to her senses. She was too immersed in the feelings of her character and completely identified herself with him. In fact, she is a player here, and this world is a virtual game, nothing more. All of Natalie's adventures began with her passion for the game called Reverse Harem. The girl was so obsessed with it that she learned all the plot twists by heart and even took first place in the game's rating for 3 years in a row. One day she found herself demoted to second place overnight. Natalie checked the list of winners and realized who exactly took the championship from her. Why is this man always trying to take everything from her? Is what she already has not enough? And she decided to take the last thing. Unexpectedly, I received a notification about the release of the full version of the game and an offer to download it. Natalie read the contents of the warnings with interest. They stated that logging out of the system was not possible until all tasks were completed. This was the long-awaited 19th version, now complete. With it, Natalie will definitely be able to return to her first place. The girl didn't even doubt it. She didn't pay any attention to the warning. The main thing that interested the gamer was that she would be the first to log into the system. The magic click was made, and the girl found herself inside the game space. At first, Natalie didn't understand where she had ended up, but she felt like she was in the body of a very little girl. It soon dawned on the gamer that she had entered a game and had been reincarnated as a baby. Natalie logged into the game using the computer, but now there was no system window or exit button. The script and developments were different from the original version. The main character used to be a saint, but now she was written as the Duke's daughter. Natalie had to think about how to take possession of the main characters. The girl had to get to the point leading to the real world. The daughter's virtual mother loved her very much. The Duchess called her child the most beautiful names. This is how the gamer became Natalie Island. When did she begin to forget that this was not her real world, but just a game? When Natalie's character was still little, she was well aware that she was in a game. While the Duchess was alive, Natalie was well aware of the duality of her existence and separated her real self from the game heroine. This was the case all the time until Sharon appeared in Natalie's virtual life. Having entered this world, Natalie hoped to quickly grow up, complete the tasks, and return to reality. But the more time Natalie spent with Sharon, the more the boundaries between the real and virtual worlds blurred. Why Natalie was so affected by Sharon's presence was unclear, but she very quickly forgot who she really was. The girl chased after her father and brother, trying to win their love, and envied her adopted sister, who was so highly valued by everyone. The gamer stopped being herself, began to live as the game character Natalie Ailsden, and almost committed an irreparable act. It's entirely possible that her jump from the railing would have caused her consciousness to dissolve, and she would have been stuck in this game forever. Natalie clearly remembered the warning that it was impossible to exit the game until the game's goal was achieved, and that attempting to forcefully quit could result in a permanent ban. The death of a character before the goal was achieved reset the entire process, and the player had to start all over again. Natalie was glad that her memory was returned just in time. If this had not happened, she would have had to go through all the torment again. The girl resolutely returned to the room. On the way, she mercilessly stepped on a black wig. Now she doesn't need this thing at all. With relief, Natalie realized how stupid and pathetic she had been. In fact, she was not a crow or a poisonous mushroom. She was the sun, the shining morning light. Of course, the Duchess was right. Natalie was like the sun at dawn. The girl was full of energy and decided that it was time for her to develop an action plan to return to reality. The game had 3 main male characters, the first being the Crown Prince, the most handsome man in the Empire. The second male figure, who had to fall at Natalie's feet, was less pleasant. The cold Northern Duke, who could only treat his beloved woman warmly, had to submit to the girl. The third is the owner of a huge black tower, a magician who possesses incredible supernatural powers. Once their level of affection towards the heroine reached 70%, the growth of feelings would begin to accelerate even more, so that everything could escalate into violence. The latter was undesirable. Natalie remembered that the time when all 3 would gather in one place would come very soon. Now the girl understood that Madame Dupre's hat was the money won at the racetrack. And even the ill-fated masquerade ball. It wasn't just luck. It was just her subconscious that remembered all the answers, even though it was an unusual version of the game. But the course of basic events remained not base. Natalie recalled that in the original version, when the heroine visited the estate, swarms of fire monsters began to appear. They turned the palace into a sea of flames, resulting in numerous casualties. The girl became worried that a monster attack might happen any minute now. This means that now the main task of the main character was to protect Ailsden. In addition, the current position of the Duke of Ailsden's daughter is ideal for meeting the three main characters of the game, and this opportunity cannot be missed. Natalie remembered very well that if she did nothing, the duchy would burn to the ground. The first task was to meet all three main characters. Only the most powerful water mage in the history of the Empire, Roger Crawford, could help Natalie with this. The water god's deep love for Roger was his blessing, and at the same time a real curse. Roger Crawford was as strong in some situations as he was unusually vulnerable in others. This state of affairs made the guy angry and irritated. However, now Natalie decided to resort to his help. It is quite possible that her help and support may soon prove useful to Crawford. Natalie arrived at the Crawford estate and looked around the majestic building with boredom. The gloomy but beautiful building greeted the girl with black thorny vines. The coachman stopped the carriage and announced his arrival. Natalie took the servant's hand and climbed out of the vehicle. She arrived, but the owner of the estate did not meet her, which is contrary to the rules of etiquette. However, this estate rarely receives guests, so the staff of servants is minimal. The girl was surprised by this statement. In her memory, this place had always been filled with the hubbub of visitors. The estate stopped inviting guests because the area became unsafe and they had to post guards every evening. This version of the world is very different from the one presented in the game. The girl walked through the gates of the estate and noted that for a ducal family, this place looked rather poor and dilapidated. The dimensions of the estate's layout seemed to be exactly the same as those used in the original game. But most likely, something happened here, and it was something bad, because the estate is too empty. Only wild black thieves screamed from the trees. One of the blackbirds flew at Natalie. The girl covered herself with her hand and drove away the feathered creature. A male voice called out to the newcomer. The owner was there and was wondering who had come to his house. The man wasn't expecting any guests today, so he was practicing water magic in his own garden, the one blessed by the god of water, Roger Crawford. The man asked again who the girl who had come was and why she had visited his house. The girl said that she was glad to meet the Duke of Crawford, and the lady bowed politely to the owner of the estate. She is Natalie Ailsden, the eldest daughter of Axion Ailsden. Natalia made a deep curtsy and closed her eyes in front of the young man. She knows she's being presumptuous by breaking into someone else's home, but she needs to talk to Roger. The man got dressed and looked at the girl suspiciously. In his opinion, Lady Ailsden could not have any business with him. However, Natalie came here to make Roger an offer he couldn't refuse. The man became interested in Natalie's words and agreed to listen to her. The blonde came to make a deal with Roger. The girl calmly folded her hands on her knees and looked straight at her interlocutor. Over a cup of tea, the aristocrats began to discuss a cunning plan. Natalie didn't want to complain, of course, but the food on the table was somehow too small for a ducal estate. Apparently, this means that Roger does not see Natalie as a real guest, although the maid has made great efforts to make everything look presentable. The girl thought about it. She began to prepare for the worst. Perhaps in this version, Rogers is bankrupt. The girl imagined the scene before her meeting, how the maid admits that there are no snacks, and the Duke orders tea to be made from everything that is left. In that case, this explains both the absence of guests and the coldness towards her. The Duke ordered the maid, who had already set out the tea, to leave the room and leave the gentleman alone. The sweet maid Ellie agreed with the master's order and left the room, specifying that if needed, she would come. Roger felt a little awkward that he was unable to receive Natalie properly now. The girl hastened to reassure the owner of the estate. She had arrived unannounced, so she had not expected a luxurious reception. In that case, Roger decided to start discussing the main thing, the reason why the girl visited his estate. The girl knows that it will be difficult to believe her words. Tomorrow, fire monsters will descend on the capital, and these monsters will turn the estate of the visiting lady into a fiery hell. This will destroy the line of Ailsden, who possesses the power of light opposite to fire. The Duke noted that the girl spoke as if she had the gift of clairvoyance, and she wanted him to believe her absurd words. The atmosphere among the aristocrats finally took on a gloomy tone. The Duke's reasoning is more correct than ever. Natalie wants Roger to deal with these monsters personally. Of course, the Duke is not obliged to believe Lady Natalie, but what is more important is not what she says, but the price she offers. Roger was intrigued by the price that would make him believe the girl's absurd words. The girl offered to become Roger's partner at the next Imperial Ball, which would take place in a week. This proposal greatly surprised the Duke. The girl burst into his house, said absurd things, and offered some nonsense as payment. In his opinion, this is all a waste of time. These words made Natalie a little worried. Everything is clearly not going according to her plan. Roger doesn't see any benefit in this for himself, because he can easily go to the ball alone. The girl continued to insist that the price she was offering would be more than ever convenient for the Duke. Now the Duke is trying hard to control his power, but he does not always succeed. The girl's knowledge surprised the guy very much. Roger was suspicious of her interlocutor's words and demanded that Natalie say directly what she meant. If Roger protects the estate and Natalie's family from the monsters, she will help stabilize his magical state. The last words really interested the Duke. Now the girl's proposal didn't sound so stupid. Natalie asked Roger to hold out his hands to her for a minute, so that she could really prove her usefulness and show her abilities. The Duke hesitated slightly and hesitantly shook his hand at the unexpected guest. The Duke and Natalie intertwined their fingers, and the girl began her spell. Lady Natalie playfully squeezed the Duke's hand and began to press against him a little. The Duke, however, remained cool and felt nothing at all at first. The first few minutes without effect made him think about throwing the girl out of his estate. However, as soon as Natalie began pouring her mana into it, the effect appeared. With the addition of Natalie's light power, the water magic that has been raging uncontrollably within Roger begins to calm down. Roger must be present at the ball. Apparently, he must control his strength if he goes alone. Given his situation, he cannot refuse the girl's help. If she would be present with him as a partner for the evening, who would help him feel better? These arguments made the Duke agree. The girl thanked him, smiled sweetly, and promised that Roger would not regret his decision. The Duke decided that if the monsters did not appear tomorrow, he would assume that the girl had approached him with ulterior motives. Natalie will be looking forward to seeing the Duke at the attack tomorrow evening. Roger responded politely, but unenthusiastically, that he would also look forward to the meeting. Although the girl left the Duke's estate and closed the heavy oak door behind her, in her opinion, the meeting went better than expected after such a cold first meeting in the garden. Natalie will gladly become the Duke's shield, and he will be her weapon in this battle to the death. In Roger's office, the butler announced that Lady Natalie had left. The young man looked out the window and rested mentally. Did he really believe that girl? She was talking such nonsense. However, Natalie's eyes certainly didn't lie, and she actually demonstrated her abilities. Perhaps, but only perhaps, it will actually be useful. Perhaps he will be able to atone for his guilt before the girl for that fateful day. Roger ordered the palace not to prepare for tomorrow night. He must not let the blonde down. Meanwhile, it seems that Natalie's father and brother have not returned from the capital yet, so she does not need to rush back to her place before she is caught. However, Sharon approached from behind Natalie. It seemed as if her stepsister had been waiting for the blonde on purpose. The brunette asked where the girl had been and why she had returned so late. Natalie waved it off and lied that she just went out to get some fresh air, and there was nothing to worry about. But Sharon grabbed her sister's hand, refusing to let her go without the truth. According to the brunette, she and the servants were very worried. I found the blonde in her room. Was she alone? Because it is dangerous to go outside now. Was Lady Natalie leaving? Whispered the maids who had come to Sharon's cries. The maids whispered among themselves, not even suspecting that the mistress could hear everything. The elder brother told Natalie not to leave her room for a single step until he returned. Just think, the girl left the estate, although her brother forbade her to even leave the room. After all, Natalie is a very difficult child, from whom you can't expect anything good. Natalie twisted her arms out of her sister's grip and demanded that the brunette tell her what she was doing there. Sharon was just worried that Natalie might be very upset, so she wanted to give her sister something. The girl clutched the bottle to her chest. This hair dye is because Natalie always said she wanted dark hair, and since her wig is now ruined, it would be easier to dye it now. Natalie thanked Sharon, but refused to take the bottle. Now she no longer needs to dye her hair dark. Sharon became worried that she had done something wrong and began asking her sister for forgiveness in advance. Natalie reassured the brunette. She hadn't done anything wrong. The blonde ran her hand over her stepsister's head. She just doesn't need to dye her hair anymore, the blonde hastened to explain. Of course, Sharon has a very beautiful hair color, the blonde running through her sister's dark strands. Now the blonde realized that neither her hair nor herself were any worse than Sharon. Natalie left the room, slamming the door behind her. Sharina remained standing in front of the closed door, staring blankly and straight at it. Sharon squeezed the paint bottle too hard, and now she was all dirty, which worried the maid. The maid even thought that Sharon had dirty Natalie because she was a very capricious person. Sharon is offended by her sister. She even hopes that this will allow Natalie to feel better. The brunette is very grateful for the care of the maids. The maids started discussing Natalie. There is clearly something wrong with her, and the gossipy maids are very happy to discuss it all. At this time, the fair-haired maid was comforting the crying Sharon, wiping her tears with a silk handkerchief. Lady Natalie has changed a lot. She even stopped wearing a wig, and it all looks very suspicious. Even her hair now seems to suit her, as well as the late Duchess. The blonde was quietly working on papers in her room, but she was distracted by her brother's loud, irritated cry. Natalie's older brother, Anatole, was informed that the blonde had left her room against his orders. Natalie stood up, irritatedly noting that her brother and father had returned. She had been planning to apologize to him anyway, and now she asked for forgiveness. This behavior greatly surprised Anatole. Natalie never apologized so easily. She always preferred punishment to apology. The girl understands how much everyone suffered while cleaning up the mess she made, and from now on, she will know her place and live accordingly. The blonde assured her brother that she would now behave quietly, gracefully, and obediently, and that she would no longer cause problems. Anatoly was very surprised by his sister's behavior. She had never been so accommodating. The girl approached her brother and looked him straight in the face. Simply apologizing was not entirely sincere behavior, the girl thought. If her brother wants to teach her a lesson, she is not averse to enduring even a cruel punishment. The girl took the metal fireplace tongs from the stand. She chose the instrument of her punishment. Looking at this, the young heir of the Duke felt a mixture of fear, hatred, and anger. The girl handed her brother the tongs. Using them on her would be sufficient punishment for her misdeed. Anatole glanced at his sister and looked down at the tongs in her hands. His voice began to tremble. Was Natalie really asking him to hit her? Fear and worry lit up the guy's eyes. Doesn't he like that sister is so honestly going to be punished? Usually people use something like that to beat her up. Natalie would like to get it a couple of times and get rid of her brother as soon as possible. The brother was confused by what his sister was talking about. He still loves her very much, even though he doesn't show it. At this time, Sharon overheard the entire conversation of her half-brother and sister. She listened carefully to their words and analyzed. At some point, she became very angry with Sharon's words, and she decided to take advantage of her position as a beloved daughter. Sharon literally fell out onto Anatole from behind the door. She grabbed his hand. You really didn't want him to scold Natalie. This is what she asked him about. The blonde only calmed down, and Anatole upset her again with his swearing. Sharon asked her brother to just leave. The young man wiped his eyes irritably. He would talk to Natalie later. His behavior had made Sharon very happy. Anatole threatened the blonde that it would be better to give a clear answer regarding her punishment. Otherwise, he would really hit her. Natalie said this only to get her brother out of the room as quickly as possible. She didn't expect it to upset him so much. He must have been worried because she didn't throw a tantrum like usual, so he acted strangely and didn't show any emotion. Natalie's brother is not what matters now. She has much more pressing problems. Tonight, at midnight, when the moon shines brightly in the sky, the estate will be engulfed in flames. She shouldn't wear heels today, the girl realized, throwing her favorite shoes away. If she put on shoes, she would not be able to quickly run out of the mansion. Then a fire would start. Instead, the girl put on boots with a small heel. Today, everything will go exactly as planned, and the fire and the attack will happen. It couldn't be otherwise, because she wouldn't allow it. The girl was impatiently awaiting the night. And now, the clock shows 5 minutes to 12, and the momentous moment of the fire is about to arrive. Joyce turned on the scary silence for me tonight. Everything was as usual, but the air was definitely going to be heavy. Soon everything will start. The clock struck midnight, and immediately there was an explosion. The estate was engulfed in flames, hungry for the lives of others, and it would spare no one. The surrounding maids and servants of the estate panicked and began to run in all directions. Magical beasts attacked the estate. The mansion is in chaos, and Natalie hopes that Roger will arrive before the first victims appear. It is time for her to slowly move out of her room. But the passage was blocked by a terrible and dark figure of a creature that did not look like a human at all. The demonic figure in front of the full moon looked straight at the blonde, clearly threatening her. This is what Natalie didn't expect. She froze, looking at the monster, which was so frightening in appearance. The girl swallowed the lump of fear that rose in her throat. Meeting face to face with a demonic beast was really frightening. This was not part of her plan. This monster wasn't supposed to appear here at this particular time. It was supposed to appear much later. After all, this is a high-class fire monster that will only be discovered next year. Could the difficulty have increased in the full version of the game? Or could it be a bug? In any case, Natalie needs to buy time, at least until Roger arrives. There was a new explosion and a frightening scream from the monster. The estate was filled with more and more fire. The Duke and his son, who are the owners of this estate, were already ready for battle and stood in a fighting position. Anatole noticed that this monster was a top-level monster, and their family's light aura was the opposite of fire. And given the level of the monster, they had no chance. The father scolded his son for being afraid, which is why their priority is saving people. They are killing the monster. The young butler of the family ran out to meet the Duke and his son. The Duke had no choice but to pay attention and listen to the servant. The young ladies Natalia and Sharon remained inside the estate, each in their own room. They did not have time to leave the building. The eldest Duke was shocked by this news. Why were his daughters still in the burning estate? This could not be. However, Anatole drew his father's attention to what was happening on the upper balconies of the estate. There, on the balcony, Natalie was attacked by that same high-level monster. The creature was dangerously close to the blonde. "Things are bad. You didn't plan to die here, girl, if you urgently need to come up with something." Suddenly, and at the wrong time, Sharon's voice was heard, calling her sister for help in fear. "Sharon shouldn't be here." Natalie ordered her sister to run away from here quickly. Otherwise, the monster will attack her too. Anatole noted that Sharon was also there, in danger and very close to the monster. The Duke, only realizing that there was a brunette there, rushed to help his daughters, clearly worried only about Sharon. Natalie knew that her father and brother would arrive any minute to save Sharon. She needed to buy time. The girl turned to Sharon, demanding that she listen carefully. Her father and brother would arrive soon. The brunette should run to them. They would definitely catch her. Sharon began to doubt. It was too high here. Well, she wouldn't be able to jump without being too scared. The blonde hastened to reassure her. Everything would be fine. She would cope. They couldn't die here together. As soon as Natalie noticed her brother's arrival, she pushed Sharon towards him, realizing that the brunette herself would not jump. Anatole caught his stepsister. She was very successful and landed neatly in his arms. The young man told his father that he had caught the brunette. Now all that was left was to save Natalie. Anatole was very worried about his own sister. But the blonde was only irritated by such care and attention from her brother. She had other plans, and Anatole was only interfering with them. The monster just grinned predatorily and swung a magic ball at her. Natalie's older brother immediately became worried and rushed forward, hoping to somehow manage to help his sister. Suddenly, Roger's figure, enveloped in water magic, flashed past the Duke and his son. The water tank quickly dealt with the fire monster. After all, fire can't withstand water. Roger showed up just in time, and the evil creature was destroyed literally a second before it could harm Natalie. Natalie was incredibly happy. Finally, the Duke, who possessed water magic, came to the rescue. The girl pushed off from the water's surface and joyfully headed towards her savior. The girl used light magic to get to Roger faster and safer. The young man looked at the girl in the nightgown with dispassionate eyes. He caught her. Roger came to fulfill his promise and apologize for doubting the blonde's words and actions. The girl was lowered to the ground, and she was finally able to speak with the water mage. She was grateful that the young man had come. He had perfectly matched the timing and her plan. Roger was able to quickly get rid of the high-ranking monsters. It was no wonder that the water god had chosen him. Roger would appreciate it if she didn't stare at him so intently. However, Natalie only laughed. Roger was apparently too embarrassed and self-confident. She looked at him quite normally. Roger thought he felt a murderous gaze on him, and he wasn't imagining it. Natalie's father was staring at the young duke from another family. He was going to kill him. Usually, Natalie's family is too busy with Sharon to notice the changes in Natalie. And judging by their faces, the blonde's father and brother again think that she is also to blame for the attack on the estate. Natalie is too lazy to explain everything. She will hope that everything will just end with house arrest. Before Adam, Natalie's father, could express his gratitude, he would like his daughter to return to him. They continued to stand next to the Duke of Crawford. Natalie was very surprised. For the first time, her father looked threateningly at her, and not at someone else, in this case, Roger. Why would he want the blonde to approach him? This slightly surprised Roger. He seemed to have helped the family, so why would Adam attack him? Anatole was also irritated. It was inappropriate for Duke Crawford to touch a young lady from another high family like that. The girl's father and brother were overcome with jealousy. The white-haired men demanded that the girl come to them and hang herself on the Duke who had arrived. The girl gently took Roger's hand and smiled at him, sincerely thanking him. She sincerely thanked the Duke of Crawford for saving her. The girl, as if on purpose, flirted with him in front of her relatives. The girl decided to smooth things over and suggested that everyone go into the living room to discuss what had happened. Roger agreed that it would be a good idea for the Eildon family to hear an explanation of what had happened. Natalie, Adam, Anatole, and Roger settled into the surviving living room and began discussing what had happened over a cup of tea. Adam thanked Roger for his timely assistance, and the young duke said that he simply did what he had to. And Natalie felt all the tension between her father and Roger. They spoke so dryly that it seemed as if the words were about to start pouring out like sand. Adam wondered how it was that Roger had learned of what had happened at the estate at such a late hour. The young grandfather with Crawford began to make excuses. He was on a walk, and there he saw how monsters began to gather in one place. So, Natalie's father thought, Roger was there by accident, and the girl stopped the argument and put down the cup. The fact remains that the Duke of Crawford helped their family, therefore he needs to be repaid with something worthwhile. Rogers considered the reward too much, but did not refuse it. As you know, the Imperial Ball is coming soon, and Roger will have to attend it, but he still hasn't been able to find a suitable partner. I would therefore like to ask Lady Natalie Aylesden to accompany him this evening. Anatole was very worried about this request. It was hardly enough to express their gratitude, but his brother was very much against it. However, Natalie interrupted her brother. She would have been happy to attend the ball as Roger's partner. Father also asked Roger, and another request, but the Duke of Crawford refused. He turned to the young lady with a request. And since Natalie agreed, there was no need for young Master Anatole to worry. The blonde's brother was very worried about his sister. However, Duke Adam stopped his son. He agreed to Roger's request, which made his son freeze in shock. Duke Crawford is their guest, so Anatole has no right to be rude to him or refuse him. The young Duke of Aylesden was stunned by his father's words and sat down silently in his seat. Roger continued. The presence of the young lady at the ball as his partner was more than enough. He needed no other compensation. The young duke from another family bowed and said that he should leave. It was already late outside, and he had to get up early tomorrow. However, Lady Natalie stopped Roger, right on the street, very late. It was so late that dawn was about to break. Why shouldn't the Duke of Crawford have breakfast with them before leaving? She asked her father and brother if she could take their savior to the refectory herself. She clearly would not accept a refusal. From Natalie's brother's side, it all sounded too suspicious. His sister could not have a romantic relationship. He won't allow his little sister to connect her life with some unknown man. Natalie's words greatly outraged Anatole. She couldn't walk him to the dining room, and it was time for the Duke to leave. Adam reprimanded his son once again, asking for condescension and understanding for his behavior, which was inappropriate for their family. Adam and the young Duke have urgent business to attend to, so they are forced to leave and will not be present at the meal. Roger agreed with the Duke's words and calmly let them go without taking offense at all. As soon as the father and son left the hall, the atmosphere between them became oppressive and foreboding of punishment. Adam demanded his son follow him into his office. Judging by his voice, Something unpleasant awaited the young man. But there was nothing to be done. Anatole could only agree with his father's order. He really did let the family's honor down before a stranger. There is no excuse for him. The young man really repented. The father said that his punishment would be that his personal allowance would be cut in half for the next 3 months. The father ordered his son to think about his behavior and leave the office bonus. The young man wanted to ask about his sister. He really finds her behavior strange. He is worried about her. At the mention of his own daughter's name, Duke Adam nervously clenched his fists. He was also not very pleased with her changes. But Anatole continued. In his opinion, they should prevent her from getting closer to the Duke of Crawford. The young man blushed a little, imagining that his sister would go to the Duke of Crawford. He was afraid that if they left everything as it was, Natalie would break the ban. A blonde can't fall in love and get married, at least not now. And it was a situation like a well-written script, the perfect moment for Natalie to fall in love at first sight. Since childhood, Natalie was a child obsessed with the desire to attract the attention of her father and brother. But as soon as the Duke of Crawford appeared, she did not even deign to glance at her family. Roger is not the partner she needs. Anatole is afraid that Natalie will foolishly become infatuated with the Duke and only create more problems. Duke Adam asked how Sharon was. Natalie was of little interest to him at the moment. Sharon was reassured and put to bed, and the family doctor said there was no need to worry about him. Sharon is fragile, so you need to visit her often and make sure she stays healthy. My father knows the ban very well, so I don't need to worry about it. Natalie has always been a difficult and capricious child, so there is no need to panic. It's interesting that the flame will fade away quite quickly, and she will forget about the Duke of Crawford. And yet Duke Roger does seem very suspicious. The father agreed with his son's concerns. His father's words calmed Anatole down at least a little. Anatoly agreed to take responsibility to keep the Duke of Crawford away from Natalie. The father calmly looked out the window and turned to his son, strictly instructing him on one important thing. Anatole must also be careful. Natalie cannot become attached to necessity. The reminder of this greatly embarrassed the young man. He was already very attached to his sister. The young man agreed with his father. He himself knows about it. Meanwhile, in the bright dining room, Natalia apologized to Roger for keeping him waiting. The girl changed her clothes before breakfast. I really needed to change the projectile. The young lady was not supposed to walk around in a nightgown. She thanked Roger for agreeing to her proposal. These were the terms of their deal. Now it was Natalia's turn to help Roger. Natalie had no problem agreeing with Roger's words, and in the end, she proposed the deal. The girl took the man by the hand and gently led him into the dining room. If the Duke desired her presence, she would agree at any time. The girl nodded towards the dining room. It was time for breakfast. After all, Roger still had to fulfill his promise. Roger the Overlord can't understand what this young lady is thinking, but it's obvious that Natalie just wants to feed him well. There were plenty of delicious treats on the table. Natalie hoped that Roger had a sweet tooth because they still had dessert waiting for them. The Duke sat down in his place and noted one very strange thing. It seemed as if only guests ate in their family. Natalie really didn't even touch her food. She said that she was very hungry and had not eaten anything, so she should start eating properly. The girl was very surprised that Roger was worried about her. Most likely she increased his level of sympathy. This needs to be checked. The girl frowned meaningfully and cast a spell to increase the level of sympathy. However, nothing changed. Absolutely nothing. And silence hung between the Duke and Natalie. The atmosphere became awkward. The Duke did not understand why Natalie said some strange words. Roger asked directly, should he answer something to this? Natalie considered this another mistake of the game. Most likely this is a problem with the settings. Natalie smiled nervously. You asked Roger not to pay attention to her words. Even on a difficult level, the game should not block the sympathy check. This bug needs to be fixed urgently. The monster did indeed appear in the center of the capital. Just as Natalie said, Roger became interested in how she found out about it. Natalie explained this by saying that prophetic dreams are also seen, a kind of vision. This is actually why she recently received the nickname Lady Luck, all because of her prophetic dreams. In this case, according to Natalie, she saw property, fortune, and an attack of monsters in a dream. And Natalie also knows from there about the Duke of Crawford's long vacation, and of course, about the ball. Now, Roger has realized that things are clear and not just nonsense, and for now, he is willing to believe Natalie, but he does not understand what his long vacation has to do with the girl. The deal ends at the ball. The girl referred to her visions and convincingly told the Duke that they would see each other again. The girl put down her utensils and began to retell one of her dreams. The girl took the Duke by the chin and raised his face to the level of her eyes. There will be many more times when they will destroy monsters together, just like yesterday. Roger noted that Natalie was a very strange lady, completely different from the others. Natalie said that she often hears about this. She is used to being considered strange. A sumptuous dinner, which is not served even to a count without the emperor's order, Roger ended up sharing with Natalie without even noticing it. The girl said that she hadn't eaten anything yesterday, so she was very hungry, so lunch had to be big. And Roger has long since stopped giving in to such influence. It's not so easy to eradicate a habit. Or maybe it's just a feeling of guilt. The sound of heels, not as loud and high as Natalie's, echoed through the stables. The sound attracted Roger's attention, and the young man turned to look at the girl who had arrived. Sharon greeted the Duke of Crawford, sheepishly informing him that she had business with him. The girl suddenly came up and buried her face in the Duke's chest, completely ignoring the man's cold. The girl justified herself by saying that she had simply tripped, and Roger had happened to be in her way. She gently ran her hand over the Duke of Crawford's fist, drawing his attention to her. The girl smiled at him warmly and happily, introducing herself, and Roger now knew that she was Sharon Aylesden. Sharon's words did not inspire the Duke of Crawford at all. On the contrary, he looked at her figure with irritation. Sharon heard that Roger helped her family, so she wants to thank him somehow too. But Roger said that Sharon herself had nothing to worry about, and pushed her away. The lady has already thanked Roger, and the Duke does not need more. Sharon was a little upset that she was pushed away so easily. Sharon sheepishly brushed her hair back. Her father hadn't told her anything yet, so she still wanted to thank him. Roger was quick to say that Natalie had thanked him on behalf of the entire family, and that he was not interested in Sharon. And the brunette was taken aback by this news. Could it be that Natalie had gotten ahead of her? It was time for Roger to leave, which he hastened to tell the brunette, and intended to leave her company. The man didn't even give the girl a glance, and the girl was worried that this was some kind of mistake, in her opinion. Roger was completely pissed off by Sharon's behavior, so he called her name in a menacing manner and threatened her. If it became known that Sharon had followed a strange man all the way to the stables, it could put them both in an awkward position. Roger's rude and cold tone made Sharon step back. Taken aback, she didn't expect such an attitude towards herself. Roger once again announced that it was time for him to take his leave. He had business waiting for him at home. Sharon had never experienced such a cold look and tone. Her father and brother were simply crazy about her and did not even dare to raise their voices at her. Roger ignored Sharon's expression and headed towards his horse and carriage. Sharon froze in place, continuing to stare at one point, which used to be Roger's face. And the man went home. He was not at all interested in this girl. As Sharon thought, Roger Crawford did not remember her. The girl assumed that it was too early. But she can wait. Everything is okay. Very soon he will remember her. Natalie Eiselden is a completely different woman. Roger noted while he was already at home during his studies. He is now in the most stable condition he has been in since he was born. When he touched Sharon, there was no reaction. It turns out they have different abilities. Despite the same blood, Roger was wrong. Only Natalie can calm him down, him and his inner strength, which he himself is unable to keep at peace. Roger was called by a servant. An urgent matter had arisen that required the Duke's attention. It turns out that Natalie had sent a letter and a gift for the Duke of Crawford, and the servant thought it was very important. The servants understand that Roger prefers to live a modest life, but since it is only a brooch, it is decided to accept the gift. Roger was more interested in the letter that Natalie had written herself. She gave him a gift in hopes of seeing him at the ball on the Duke's shirt. She knows that Roger usually wears a navy dress uniform, so she picked out a brooch that would match it. Roger also decided to leave the brooch for himself and ordered the butler to leave it on the table. The butler happily reported that young Lady Natalie would be very pleased with the Duke's decision. Natalie also added in the letter that she could send him some sweets and food, and anything else that the Duke might need. She said that this was simply a gesture of partnership. And Roger was skeptical about Natalie's last words. It's just that partners don't care that much. In her letter, Natalie noted that at their first meeting, she had received only a cup of miserable tea, and that the Duke had only one uniform, and Roger felt uneasy that he had been considered terribly poor. It had been quite a while since Roger had been looked after so kindly by someone. It would have been very nice and pleasant if this child had survived. Now she would have been the same age as the young lady. The young Duke of Crawford looked out the window, thinking about 1,000 things at once. If his meeting with Natalie is just a coincidence, then it's likely that this is the price he must pay as well. A few days later, the long-awaited imperial ball finally took place. Natalie was asked to think again before it was too late to give up the point, and they started picking on her again. Anatole considered Natalia's desire to attend the ball to be that she simply wanted to look around the capital, but she was planning to come here next week anyway. Natalie's father and brother had a very hard time getting her a lenient sentence. They lost their heads. Her brother's lamentation was stopped by Natalie's rude words. She was already tired of his nagging. Such rudeness really made Anatole shut up. Even you were speechless. Natalie understood everything, so her brother should stop constantly blaming her for all sins. And all his words about understanding are false. And Natalie never asked for understanding. She wants to continue to be ignored, as always before. Anatole began to get irritated by his sister's behavior, but Natalie promised to behave decently. But the budding scandal was interrupted by Sharon. She asked her brother and Motya not to argue, and Anatole cannot refuse her. Sharon recalled that it was a rare occasion when all the Aylesden children went to the imperial palace together. Natalie exhaled and turned away from this sweet, in quotation marks, picture. She was tired of drama. Looking out the window, the girl noticed the one she had been longing to see today, Roger, also getting out of the carriage. Natalie said she intended to get off here, and they would pick her up. Anatole was skeptical about her words. It was a long way from here to the imperial palace, but the young man did not forbid her to do so. The girl laughed sarcastically at her brother's words. How unexpected it was that he didn't scold her again. Anatole didn't expect that Natalie would actually get off here, and allowed her to do so only to tease her. The young man tried to stop his sister by grabbing her hand and holding her inside the carriage. Natalia didn't like that her brother grabbed her by the elbow. It was unexpected and unpleasant. If Natalie really wants to go to the ball, then Anatole would be her best partner, as the young Duke of Aylesden decided, so the girl should return to her place. Sharon intervened in a new conversation. If Anatole would accompany Natalie, then who would accompany her? For example, they could all go together. They are a family. Natalie seized on her stepsister's words, in which case Sharon and Anatole could really have fun together as brother and sister. Natalie stepped out of the carriage and headed towards Roger, without looking back. She had no intention of listening to her brothers moaning and grumbling any longer. Even Anatole's shout that this was wrong didn't stop the girl. Natalie noted cheerfully, as she came closer, that she was indeed not mistaken, and that it was indeed the Duke of Crawford in front of her. The Duke was surprised when the blonde called out to him. He didn't expect to meet her so soon. The girl came up to him and grabbed his hand, pulling him towards her and completely attracting his attention. A very pleasant surprise that they met here. The girl also noted that Roger wore the gift she sent him and was glad that it actually matched the uniform. The Duke was a little embarrassed and said that he could not refuse his partner's gift. In this case, the girl came closer to the carriage and Roger. Natalie offered to accompany the Duke of Crawford to the palace, since she was, after all, his partner for the evening. The moon shone on the imperial palace, and people kept arriving and arriving for the annual and grand event. The gates will be open all evening and all night, allowing guests to enter. Natalie looked at the imperial palace from the windows of the Crawford family carriage. The imperial palace is where the crown prince, another main character in the game, lives. In the original game, choosing the crown prince was the fastest and safest way to get to the end. He is a gentleman by nature, so the affection level quickly increased. This evening, Natalie absolutely must attract the attention of the crown prince in order to survive in this world and win the game. Roger reported that they had finally arrived at the main door of the emperor's estate. The girl confidently stepped onto the carriage's step, extending her hand to the Duke of Crawford. Natalia was confident in her partner for the evening. She brazenly uses him. Roger took the girl's hand and helped her down. carefully supporting her by the palm and waist. Natalie promised to take care of Duke Crawford tonight. He definitely won't have to worry about his strength today. Lady Natalie and the Duke of Crawford walked hand in hand into the ballroom of the Imperial Palace. The appearance of such a brilliant young couple attracted everyone's attention. Naturally, no one recognized Natalie in her new appearance, without a black wig. But everyone was surprised by Crawford's appearance at the ball with his partner. The most attentive lady nevertheless recognized the unfamiliar lady as one of the daughters of the Duke of Aylesden. The community was in a state of agitation, wondering if this was the same Natalie that everyone had called the Aylesden family's poisonous mushroom. Only now did those around her realize that it was she, only with light hair. Had she dyed it or something? The ladies were perplexed. Those who are more knowledgeable reminded that this is her natural color. Natalie has had light hair since childhood. Just like her mother, the late Duchess of Aylesden, Natalie wore a black wig all the time to look like Sharon, because she believed that if she looked like the girl everyone adored, then they would be able to love her too. Now that her memory had returned, Natalie no longer hated her blonde hair. Crawford approached Natalie with a question that had long interested him. The Duke asked what the young lady wanted from him if she dared to go so far. Natalie thought about it. She was simply formulating a question to the inscription, and this was an important moment in the game. Natalie smiled and looked slyly at Crawford. The girl suggested that the Duke be more frank and admit that the power of water had not yet subsided within him, and that he needed her help. Crawford realized the young lady was right and asked her to stay with him, since she knew everything herself. Natalie pouted and asked if that was the right way to ask for a favor. Crawford took a deep breath and replied that he humbly asked Natalie to stay with him. In fact, the young people were not alone. They were being watched by a group of young knights who were very interested in who this lady was, with whom the Duke arrived. He had not told them before that he would come to the ball with such a charming partner. One of the most brazen declared that it was now clear why the Duke of Crawford had not been in society for so long and what he had been doing. Natalie was even glad that Crawford got along well with the young aristocrats. The girl assumed that the knights had come to greet the Duke. Natalie suggested that the men continue their conversation without her, agreeing to wait aside. The girl hoped that she would have the opportunity to communicate with the knights later. Crawford left with the youth, promising his companion to return soon. Natalie said she was looking forward to it. In fact, she urgently needed to be somewhere else. It was necessary to follow the second main male character of this game. The god of life has long loved the empire of Luxor. For the sake of the empire, which he treasured more than any other world, the god of life blessed the emperor's heir with the power of life. This power was inherited by the first prince, Aemon Luxor. However, this fatal handsome man had one drawback. Natalie assumed that the prince was now in the center of the ballroom. Prince Aemon Luxor was certainly an extraordinary man, in every sense of the word. Just at that moment, the prince agreed to dance with one of the girls, and it was she who invited the prince. Aemon kindly bowed to his partner's hand and said that it was a great honor for him to dance with her. The girl lost her composure as she approached the prince. Heat rose to her face, and it turned very red. The prince inquired about her well-being. The girl replied that she was fine and blushed even more. The prince advised her to take care of herself, because if she got sick, the prince's heart would not be able to bear such grief. Watching the prince and his partner, Natalie realized how he seduced women and guessed why he was called the flirtatious crown prince. The girl heard one of the men whisper that he would never forgive this. The angry aristocrat said that there was a limit to how much one could look down on someone. Natalie came closer and clearly heard the words that all this idiot has, it seems, was the prince. This beautiful face and meaningless title. The aristocrat, who had been muttering angry words all this time, rushed towards the prince, threw a glass of wine in his face, and shouted that he should not dare touch his bride. Natalie knew that this was exactly what was going to happen, and stood between the prince and the enraged aristocrat in time, so that the wine from the glass spilled right onto her dress. Turning to the culprit of the incident, the Duchess noticed that his greeting seemed rather aggressive. Young Master Arnold must have missed her very much, Natalie wondered. The look in her unusual eyes caught Arnold by surprise. The young man was confused and began to apologize. He asked what family the nice lady was from, intending to come to her home and apologize in the most proper manner. Natalie pretended to be outraged that Arnold didn't recognize her, which put him in an even more awkward position. Natalie remembered that Arnold looked at her so angrily, and now he was taking revenge on her in such an original way. The girl admitted that she had indeed caused the young man some inconvenience, and therefore would not blame him. Arnold looked closer and realized that Natalie Island was standing in front of him. A few weeks ago, Natalie saw a necklace in a jewelry store that she really liked. The girl was told that the necklace was custom-made and not for sale. She offered such a price that the owner was forced to sell it to her. As it turned out, Arnold ordered this necklace for his bride. Lady Kate, Arnold's fiancée, overheard their conversation and approached with admiration and surprise, asking if Arnold had really ordered that necklace especially for her. Whatever the young master's true intentions, the situation did not attract much attention. Many thought that Arnold would throw wine in the crown prince's face. It turned out that Arnold was aiming at Natalie Aylesden. Of course, it was all just because of her. Society decided that Natalie had not changed at all. Natalie, meanwhile, informed the prince that she had come to greet him and asked for forgiveness for the incident that had occurred. Trying to be as gentle as possible, Natalie asked if Crown Prince Eamon of Luxor would accept her chaotic greeting. The prince was enchanted by the young duchess. Such a beautiful girl could not help but attract his attention. Eamon replied that he was glad to meet her and suggested that they leave this noisy hall for another, more secluded place. Natalie readily agreed to the prince's proposal. Eamon hurried to move in the charming beauty to a place where they would be alone, and no one would interfere with their communication. Lady Nadine, who had just danced with the prince, was distressed that His Highness's attention had been diverted to another, and declared that the prince was kind to everyone, even to the poisonous Aylesden mushroom. The second girl, Lady Donna, decided to warn Nadine and told her that there were some rumors about the prince, some of which made it difficult to adore him. People say that girls lose their magical powers as soon as they get close to the prince. The gossips whispered that Lady Natalie had never had magical powers, so she shouldn't worry, and anyway, the prince wouldn't pay attention to her. However, looking at the departing couple, Nadine understood her fiasco. The prince rejected her offer and immediately moved on to a new woman. How it happened that, of all the possible ladies, it was that same problematic Natalie Aylesden the girl could not understand. The prince's tender glances towards Natalie evoked in Nadine a range of the most varied feelings, which could hardly be called kind. The girl bit her lips until they bled from anger. How is this Natalie any better than her? Nadine was really angry and decided that the prince would regret rejecting her and choosing another. At this time, the prince tried to win Natalie's favor. First of all, he decided to give the girl a new dress, since she suffered because of him. Natalie refused the prince's kind offer, citing that the wine stain was barely noticeable. His Highness asked if Lady Natalie was comfortable staying in a wet outfit, which of course was not true. Natalie expressed confidence that the warm air in the night garden would quickly dry her dress. The prince invited Natalie to take a walk in the garden together, especially since the weather was wonderful. After some time, the prince announced to Natalie that a simple walk as an apology was not enough, and therefore he brought her to this place. It is a treasure that only a select few know about, and this place is so special that no one can enter it even on the night of a grand ball. The prince thought it was a very beautiful and quiet place, and hoped that Natalie would like it here, which he hastened to tell the girl. The girl replied that for her, this was more than a worthy payment for the incident that had occurred. The prince smiled and said that he had already managed to prepare himself for the wine from the glass, to fly in his direction. Natalie did not expect that the prince was so smart and observant. This discovery surprised the girl. The prince said that he knew that Arnold harbored a grudge against him, and he could have challenged him to a duel long ago, rather than secretly hating him. The young man decided that he would simply accept the challenge and get it over with, but he never imagined that Natalie would intervene. The girl ironically suggested that the prince was very kind, since he gave people what they wanted. His Highness was not surprised that Natalie understood him so well. He assumed that it was because they were in similar situations, but what the lady wanted from him in that case, he understood that she had not just decided to stand up for him. Natalie praised His Highness's insight and said that it was a very important factor for his survival. Natalie, as a lady from a high-born family, had known the crown prince since childhood, but was not close to him. The women who surrounded His Highness despised Natalie, but whenever she met the prince, she felt a strange sense of kinship. Natalie always felt that the prince, surrounded by numerous admirers, was actually very lonely, and he seemed overly concerned with the opinions of others, despite his high status. Everything that happened to the prince was too similar to what was happening to Natalie, so the girl felt uneasy. Many women adored the prince, just as many people despised him, and, as expected, they were all unhappy with his birth. The prince was the emperor's illegitimate child from a simple servant, his shame and pride. His Highness's mother was a simple servant, with no status, nobility, or wealth. The prince did not know whether to be ashamed or proud of his mother, and it was a red stain on the name of Aemon Luxor. In ancient times, the empire of Luxor was blessed by the god of life. The god would grant a blessing to an heir worthy of the throne, usually bestowing the greatest power on the firstborn of the emperor. According to tradition, the emperor entered into a political marriage with a princess from an allied state, hoping that their firstborn would inherit the empire. 10 years of marriage between the emperor and his wife passed, but the child was still not born. Rumors began to spread that the god of life had left the empire, and relations between the crowned spouses deteriorated. It was at this time that the emperor met Aemon's mother, who was hired to work at the palace as a servant. The emperor was walking in the garden, trying to calm his irritation and anxiety after another argument with his wife. The girl got lost in the corridors of the palace and came across the emperor, mistaking him for just a noble gentleman from whom she could ask directions. She did not know that the gentleman she met was the emperor, and politely asked him to tell her where the servants' rooms were. The emperor looked at the girl and fell in love at first sight, with her blue eyes and blonde hair. The girl reciprocated His Majesty's feelings, and soon gave birth to her first child, which was tantamount to a miracle. The lovers seemed to have forgotten that the emperor had a legal wife, and this was their main mistake. The empress could not do anything against her husband, but she was quite capable of taking revenge on the homewrecker. Before the unfortunate servant had time to confess to her beloved that she was pregnant, the girl was thrown out of the palace, making it look as if she had left of her own free will. And there, far from the capital, the emperor's favorite servant gave birth alone to a boy, Aemon. From grief and illness, Aemon's mother died that same winter, leaving behind only a young son. The boy had no guardians, and the future crown prince wandered around the slums as a homeless child until he was 6 years old. The emperor learned too late about the fate of his beloved, and that she had given birth to his son. He had to put a lot of effort into finding the boy and bringing him to the palace. No matter how much the empress and other courtiers objected, Aemon was the emperor's firstborn. Incredibly similar to his father, he possessed the strongest blessing of the god of life. Despite the fact that he was illegitimate, no one could take his place. True, there was one big problem. By that time, the empress had also been able to give birth to a boy. Although he looked more like his mother, Aemon waited desperately for his sacred power to awaken, but fate did not spare him this time either. The second prince, Paramel, awakened his power much earlier, although he was much younger than Aemon. The emperor rightly believed that the abilities of the youngest son were too weak to claim the throne, and, by order of the emperor, it was decided to wait for the awakening of the powers of the first son. Paramel was furious with his father's decision. His power was greatly limited because of it, and the emperor clearly sympathized more with the first son. The half-brother princes often quarreled. Paramel was angry that if it were not for Aemon, he himself could have become the crown prince. Hardened by years of living in the slums, Aemon was not going to give in to his younger brother, and laughed that he should have been born earlier. Paramel was furious that even Aemon, who had not yet awakened his abilities, dared to speak so insolently to him. The younger prince threatened Aemon that he would become emperor, and the first thing he would do would be to expel him from the palace and from the country. So they coexisted in hostility and could not be reconciled. The crown prince, deprived of power, and the second prince, whose power was not enough to rule. This continued for many years. Aemon asked why Natalie, like the other ladies, had kept her distance from him before. Natalie replied that she did not understand why the prince cared about it. She did not have the strength or abilities that could be stolen anyway. The prince pretended not to understand what Natalie was talking about, although he knew perfectly well the truth of her words. The young duchess replied that she knew about the prince's ability to absorb the power of other people and create something close to the power of life. Natalie was silent for a moment, waiting for the prince's reaction to her words. Aemon was silent. Then Natalie said that she knew how to make him emperor. The girl said that she could help the prince only if he was absolutely frank with her. The prince again pretended not to understand anything and looked closely at Natalie. He did not expect that she would turn out to be such a brave and determined woman and would say such amazing things. He admitted with regret in his voice that the courtiers called him an inferior crown prince. How could he become an emperor? Aemon rejected all speculation that he was able to absorb other people's powers. He claimed that it seemed to someone, and gossip started. Natalie made the point that Prince Aemon, it turns out, isn't being particularly honest with her. The young duchess informed His Highness that she had just seen him absorb Lady Brecht's abilities. Natalie reminded the prince of how he had used the absorbed powers to secretly resolve crises throughout the empire. Aemon looked at Natalie with bewilderment. What was hidden in this woman? Was she really capable of helping him, or was she a spy sent by her younger brother? The prince's caution got the better of his curiosity, and the boy said that he did not understand what Natalie was talking about now. The girl's disappointment knew no bounds. The prince did not want to make contact. Natalie pretended that she did not care, and said that if that was the case, then apparently she was mistaken and apologized for the disturbance. The girl reminded the prince that recently many areas of the empire had suffered greatly from pests, because of which all the crops had dried up and died. Maybe that's why the prince was with young Lady Brecht, because she is a very powerful Flora mage. Most likely His Majesty intended to absorb part of Lady Brecht's power to make the crops grow. The prince gave in and told the girl that if she knew so much about him and his intentions, then there was simply no point in denying anything further. However, His Highness believed that no one else should know about this. And how did Natalie know all this? She sent a spy, or she was a spy herself, nothing else. Natalie asked the prince if he would believe her if she said that she had seen all this in a dream. Arnold was puzzled by Natalie's message that Lady Natalie had recently been seeing prophetic dreams. Natalie told the prince that in her dream she had seen him become emperor. Natalie didn't lie to the NPC. At the end of the game, Roger became Archduke and Aemon became emperor. Natalie knew the game's plot and all its twists by heart, so she could easily pretend to have prophetic dreams. The prince was intrigued and suggested to Natalie to allow this option, which he believed her. Even if Natalie wasn't lying, the prince doubted. Where was the guarantee that, having correctly understood his past from the events of the prophetic dream, she also correctly understood his future? Natalie agreed that it was difficult to believe in his ascension to the imperial throne now, as the crown prince currently lacked power, authority, and influence. However, Natalie continued, what would the prince say if she claimed to know a way to awaken his abilities? Natalie hit the nerve when she said that if the prince valued his life, then why shouldn't he do something? Natalie sighed sadly and admitted that His Highness, like no one else, understood the meaning of these words. Currently, Aemon is the crown prince of the empire, but according to the rules of the lineage, Paramal, born of the empress, has somewhat equal rights to the throne. If we remember that Paramal's magical powers have already awakened, then Aemon's position becomes even more precarious. Aemon is only the crown prince, because traditionally, the firstborn of the emperor has the strongest life force and was crowned for his potential alone, but he has yet to live up to the expectations of those around him. The Empress increasingly insists that Aemon's inability to awaken his power is due to the god of life rejecting him. Her Majesty insisted that her son Paramel should inherit the throne because he had at least some magical powers. The Emperor's faith in his firstborn was unwavering, which was the reason why the Empress's supporters planned to assassinate Iron. Attempts to eliminate the Crown Prince have already been made, but they have all failed. The situation is complicated by the fact that the Emperor Father is ill, and it is unknown how long he will live. If the Emperor dies before Aemon awakens his magical essence, then no one will stop Paramel from becoming Emperor. Aemon had to prove as quickly as possible that he was blessed by the God of Life. If the prince cannot prove this, then there is an almost 100% risk that he will be eliminated as an heir, and perhaps even as a person, by the Empress's supporters. Natalie asked Aemon to give her his hand and say the activator word, assuring the prince that this time everything would work out. The prince extended his hand to the girl and warned her that his abilities had never manifested themselves before. Natalie promised that it would happen right now. Eamon just had to take the sword and say the activator word. The girl promised that this time everything would be different, since she was standing next to him. The prince found Lady Natalie's proposal absurd and impossible to implement, so he was skeptical about her idea. Only the girl's uncompromising conviction made him submit. Eamon felt the power enter him. It seemed incredible. His abilities had never manifested before. Natalie replied that, unfortunately, not everything was as clear and cloudless as he thought. The girl took her hand away from the prince's hand and saw that the magical glow was fading very quickly. Eamon was upset. Was his level of power really inferior to his brother? Was the god of life really turning his back on him? The prince decided that this could not be, and asked Natalie to wait until he went away for a second. Natalie was confident that she could increase Eamon's strength to 100% if she pulled off a few tricks. The girl took a step towards the prince and touched his cheek. Such contact was supposed to help the power awaken. The assassins were very close. They believed that the prince did not realize the danger and was carried away by his next passion, and now was the time to catch him off guard. These people believed that Eamon must die before he could awaken his power, for the glory of Glior. The poisoned arrow landed on the bowstring and began its deadly flight. Everything had to happen here and now. Natalie moved Eamon out of the line of fire, and the arrow flew past, miraculously missing them. Eamon was afraid for his companion and pressed her to himself, trying to shield her with his body. The prince wondered who had shot at him, an empress's mercenary or another hostile group. Eamon apologized to Natalie for dragging her into this risky venture. He stated that these people only needed him, and therefore she should run away as quickly as possible. Natalie stated that she could not leave and abandon the prince, and besides, right now he would be able to use his power to its full potential. The gamer understood why the NPC prince couldn't activate his power. Everything was much more obvious than it seemed before. It was just that Eamon was using the wrong activation word. Why and where this error in the game character's memory came from was unclear, but there was no time to figure it out now. Using the wrong activator led to the prince's magical powers quickly fading. Natalie demanded that Eamon take the sword and repeat sound for sound what she said. The young people pressed themselves tightly against each other and almost in unison shouted the activation word, Bargilion. At that moment, another arrow sent at the prince swirled in a whirlwind that appeared out of nowhere and flew upward. The assassin wondered if this was the power of life, but they assured him that the first prince was devoid of any magical powers. The mercenary felt that his feet were rooted to the ground, and he could not move. Eamon realized that the shelling had stopped at his request. Could it really be that his ability had manifested itself? Natalie smiled triumphantly and asked if the prince now believed that she could help him become emperor. Eamon still didn't trust the girl and admitted that it was very kind of her to be so confident, but she could make anyone else emperor, and only him. Natalie clarified that if she said that she saw their destinies in a dream, she would lose a lot of the prince's trust, or everything would remain the same. The girl said that many people call her a poisonous mushroom or a crow, and they also whisper that His Highness is a defective heir. Isn't it clear that Natalie just wants to prove to these people that they are wrong? Natalie told the prince that she wanted to punish all these people, to take revenge for all her grievances, and for Eamon's grievances at the same time. The prince was convinced, and even a little amused by Natalie's explanation. He liked the girl more and more. The young man stepped decisively towards Natalie, pressing her tightly and tenderly to his chest in a demanding but soft embrace. The prince whispered that in this case, they would become closer to each other than ever before. A close relationship with a man, and especially with a prince, did not frighten Natalie. Moreover, she needed it. In order to get out of this game safely, she needed one of the main male characters to fall madly in love with her. Naturally, they needed to get closer. Natalie replied to the prince that if they became closer, they would be able to trust each other completely and communicate freely. Eamon relaxed completely, and Natalie noted that his attractiveness increased. The prince asked whether Natalie would really start visiting the palace next week, and Natalie confirmed this information. This pleased the prince, since in this case, they would have no obstacles to meeting at least for some time. Natalie thought that there was no need to be too secretive with the prince. Any witness would immediately think that they were lovers, and no one would even think that they were having a business conversation. The prince announced that he would be happy to continue the conversation with Natalie, but the knights of the guard would soon arrive. Nearby, the prince's would-be assassins lay on the ground, immobilized by his power. They posed no danger. Aemon was adamant that these men would first be interrogated under duress, and then executed for the assassination attempt on His Highness. The prince promised Natalie that he would make sure that from now on, not a single dress of hers would be damaged because of him, and that no one would dare to hurt her again. Aemon parted with Natalie with great regret. This girl struck him right in the heart. Natalie replied that she would look forward to their next meeting. More meetings meant a higher level of sympathy. The Duke attended a meeting of the Emperor's military commission and took part in the planning of important state affairs. The man was grateful to Lady Natalie for giving him the opportunity to endure this evening. If the Duke had again lost control of his power and gone berserk before the Emperor, his life would have ended very sadly. The Emperor would not tolerate another inappropriate behavior by the Duke of the North, and so he tried to behave decently. Losing his composure threatened the Duke with arrest, prison, and the death penalty, one option worse than the other. The butler ran into the meeting room with a loud cry, rudely interrupting all the conversations of the aristocrats. The servant announced that he had very urgent news. The imperial barrier had detected a threat. The emperor assumed that someone was able to activate their power, and the barrier was actually fine. The butler reported that a loud explosion had thundered in the garden, but when the guards rushed towards the sound, they found armed men lying there unconscious. The Duke thought with alarm that it was to the garden that the Crown Prince and Lady Ailsden were heading. The Emperor arrived in the ballroom and told the assembled people some disturbing news. On the back of the hands of the attackers found in the garden today, the emblem of an enemy country was found. The Emperor was greatly concerned about how they had managed to penetrate the palace grounds. His Majesty announced that in a normal situation, he would have already executed everyone for failing to fulfill their duties to protect the palace. But since the attackers did not cause much damage, the Emperor announced that he would show mercy. The Emperor expected a full report from his generals on how mercenaries from an enemy country could penetrate the territory of the most guarded place in the empire, the imperial palace. The Duke of the North hastened to inform the Emperor of important information before the spies were discovered. The first prince remained in the garden for quite a long time. The Duke's information was confirmed. The first prince was at the very epicenter of the attack, but did not receive a single scratch. The second prince found this outcome of events suspicious. Everyone saw the crown prince leave the banquet hall, and soon after, an explosion was heard. The emperor asked Paramel if he could confirm this and ensure the safety of all those present. At this time, Aemon entered the room and said that he was able to answer all the questions himself. The prince told his father that during the banquet, Lady Ailsden's dress had become dirty, and he had to escort her to the drawing room, which meant going through the garden. The prince reported that while they were walking in the garden, they were attacked by intruders, and that Lady Island narrowly escaped injury and death. Aemon announced that Lady Natalie Ailsden could confirm his words and testify that he was not a spy. Aemon hoped that his explanation was sufficient for everyone present, including the second prince. The emperor coughed and swayed. It was clear that the ruler's strength was leaving him. The court physician appeared and began to scold the emperor for coming to the throne room when he should be resting and taking medicine. The emperor retired to his chambers, having first given the order for the traitor to be found and severely punished. Natalie watched Prince Aemon and realized that the young man was very worried about his father's health. The girl told the prince that she would be fine and that he could go with his father. Aemon replied that it was hard for him to see His Majesty in such a state. As a gentleman, he should have escorted Lady Natalie to the carriage, but he must leave her, although he was very sorry to do so. When saying goodbye, the prince hugged the girl and promised that soon he would find time just for the two of them, and then they would be able to talk to their heart's content. The Duke's appearance interrupted the courtesies between the prince and Natalie. The father looked more menacing than ever. The Duke of the North, Crawford, sharply told the prince that he was grateful to him for looking after Lady Natalie in his absence, and that he could now take care of his companion himself. In all these stormy events, Natalie completely forgot about Roger Crawford. She told Roger that she and the prince had their own reasons. The prince sharply reprimanded Roger Crawford for not being polite enough to Lady Natalie. Besides, the prince declared furiously, leaving a lady alone at a banquet was unworthy of a gentleman. Roger retorted that His Highness was very fond of chatting after he had put the lady in mortal danger. Natalie couldn't understand why Roger and Eamon argued and fought so fiercely, and why Roger kept her as if she belonged only to him. Eamon did not understand Roger's behavior and words, and stated that he was acting as if there was a deeper relationship between him and the lady than those around him thought. The Duke replied cheekily that he and the lady were giving each other what each of them desperately needed. Eamon had not expected to compete with Roger. Lady Natalie was beginning to be in high demand, but that did not mean the prince was ready to give in forever. Given the current situation, the prince decided to temporarily step back and allow Natalie to leave with Roger. After all, they came to the ball together. Next time, Eamon decided to be first in line to communicate with Lady Natalie and not give up his right to anyone else. Natalie did not expect such an active struggle for her attention between the Duke and the prince. The two argued over her like little children over a new and beautiful toy, and in some ways it was even pleasant to receive such attention. The gamer decided that it would be better for her not to create a situation where these two non-player characters would meet eye to eye. The reason was that when the affection level of the main male characters in the game reaches the same value, a dangerous situation is created. The men might start fighting to the death to get the heroine, and this could lead to the death of one of them. Such a state of affairs was not beneficial to Natalie. The girl was distracted from these thoughts by the Duke of Crawford, who demanded that the lady pay a little attention to her official companion at this ball. Roger asked Natalie if she had been hurt in the attack by enemy spies, and if she was really okay. The girl replied that she was fine. She had just fallen, and the Duke did not need to worry about her. The Duke stated that as her official partner at this ball, he could not help but worry about his companion. Apparently, while he was busy with Natalie, many different events happened. Crawford was told that young Master Arnold had thrown wine on Natalie, and the Duke had asked the girl the reason for this act. The lady replied that she did not blame people for not liking her, and the stain was almost dry and almost invisible, so she was all right. Crawford extended his hand to Natalie, and she was surprised to see that he was holding a handkerchief in it. Roger said he felt terribly awkward, but all he could offer her now was this handkerchief. The Duke explained that although the scarf looked a little rough, it had one very interesting feature. Natalie couldn't understand what could be special about a simple men's scarf made of rough fabric. Some numbers appeared above the Duke's head, which was very unexpected for Natalie. Perhaps this was his level of affection for her. Natalie forgot herself a little and began to pinch the Duke's cheeks, wanting to understand what these numbers actually meant. The Duke abandoned Natalie's attempts to change the shape of his jaw and asked the girl what was wrong with his face. Natalie came to her senses and got out of it by saying that Roger was a little dirty, so she was trying to wipe the dirt off his cheek. The affection board had never shown up before, and she was curious and didn't understand what actions turned it on. But it popped up and reminded her that she was still in the game. It was unexpected and funny. Suddenly, Natalie's older brother, Anatole, appeared and growled at Duke Crawford, telling him to immediately take his hands off the girl. The brother suddenly decided to stand up for his sister. This was something new. Before, he didn't care about her at all. Crawford held the girl tightly by the waist, and the appearance of this couple was really quite ambiguous. Anatole abruptly removed the Duke's hands from his sister's waist. His behavior was an even greater surprise for Natalie. Usually her brother didn't care what, where, or how happened to her. Anatole made a complaint to the Duke that his sister had to endure a lot while her partner was not around, and now he appeared and began to touch her. Natalie asked her brother what he had been doing all this time. She was angry that because of her brother, Roger's level of affection, which she had tried so hard to increase, had decreased. It would be better if her brother continued to ignore her, as he did before, and did not interfere in her affairs and relationships. Natalie haughtily asked her brother whether he had any right to reprimand her and the Duke of Crawford. Anatole was indignant. How dare Natalie say such a thing to him? She was not yet old enough to contradict her older brother. The girl stated that he himself was busy with Sharon and did not think at all about how she was and what was happening to her. Now that all her misadventures are over, Anatole has appeared here and is blaming other men for everything. She is even a little ashamed of her brother. Anatole was surprised and indignant why Natalie was speaking to him so harshly. The Duke asked the girl to stop and not to quarrel with her brother. He was really to blame for not being able to take care of her, and she did not need to stand up for him. Crawford suggested that everyone calm down and stop blaming each other for things that are not so important right now. Natalie agreed with the Duke, especially since they were already becoming the center of attention of the aristocrats present at the ball. She asked the Duke and her brother for forgiveness for her harshness. The girl asked the Duke of Crawford to take her home and suggested that her brother stay at the ball with Sharon. Anatole nervously grabbed his sister's hand and ordered her to stop acting like a child. The brother said that the father was going to come for her himself. He already knew that Natalie had been attacked and was very worried about her. The news that her father was worried about her came as a real surprise to Natalie. The girl was already irritated that everyone began to behave differently than usual. This prevented her from achieving her goals. Natalie firmly stated that she had already announced her decision and demanded that Anatole let go of her hand, since he was squeezing it very tightly, causing the girl pain. Lady Natalie told the Duke that she was sorry to part with him, but she hoped that they would see each other again. Crawford promised that next time he would improve and fulfill all his duties as your partner. Natalie coquettishly replied that she was really counting on next time and would look forward to it when it came. Anatole politely asked permission to say something to the Duke of Crawford. Turning around, the young Duke of Aylesden sternly asked the Duke of Crawford to try to refrain from further connections with the House of Aylesden. Crawford met these words with deathly silence. He clearly did not accept them and will continue to pursue Natalie. Anatole continued that he remembers what happened 15 years ago on the Crawford territory, when Anatole personally attended the funeral. There were many rumors about the Crawford family at the time, and the Duke, as the only survivor, should know about it better than anyone else. For others, the cause of the death of Roger's parents and sister was still unclear and full of mysteries. There were rumors that the unstable nature of Roger's power was to blame for everything. The boy was unable to stop himself in time and personally destroyed everyone. Anatole said that he did not want the same tragedy to be repeated in Aylesden, and he hoped that the Duke would understand him correctly. Crawford chuckled and declared that Anatole hadn't changed at all. He was still the same asshole he had always been. Even in his youth, the young Duke Anatole was always incredibly attached to his sister Natalie and jealously followed her everywhere. The brother and sister left the room, and Anatole said that they urgently needed to talk in private. Natalie announced that she had nothing to talk about with her brother, who knew nothing about her life. Anatole got angry at his sister and asked when she would grow up and how long he would have to tolerate her selfishness. It seemed that Anatole was once again going to blame Natalie for everything and present her in an unfavorable light. The girl flared up and asked what was wrong with her brother and why he continued to accuse her of all mortal sins. No matter what she did, he only got angry, scolded, and punished her, while expecting a good attitude. Is that too much to ask? Anatole stated that she had no idea what he and their father had done for her. Suddenly, the father's voice was heard, and the old Duke, who had suddenly appeared, did not let his son finish speaking. The father ordered his son to keep quiet unless he wanted to further ruin their family's reputation. The Duke reprimanded his son for not being restrained and allowing his emotions to get the better of him, which is especially unacceptable in public. Anatole apologized to his father for his behavior, and, as a good son and heir to the family name, promised to improve. The old Duke announced that they would talk about it later and instructed his son to explain everything to Sharon himself. The father ordered his daughter to get into the carriage. Natalie was puzzled. Did her father really want to talk to her about something? The carriage doors closed and separated the daughter and father from the outside world, cutting off Natalie's last escape route. Natalie asked if maybe it would be better for her to stay with her brother and sister at the ball. The Duke interrupted her abruptly and announced that he had a very serious conversation with his daughter. The Emperor felt very ill. The illness worsened, and this forced His Majesty to go to bed. Aemon held his father's hand. He treasured him very much, but not as an all-powerful ruler, but as the only dear and beloved person in the world. The Emperor told his son that today he saw that an old withered tree in the garden had come to life and put out new leaves. Aemon looked at his father's weakening strength with sadness. He would have given anything to restore his health. Father said that before the tree died, he and Aemon's mother loved to spend time in its shade. The emperor remembered his beloved. He considered her the most beautiful woman in the world. Only with her he was happy. The emperor asked Aemon if he still didn't want to become emperor. The son could say nothing to his father to console him. He did not feel worthy of the throne. Aemon replied to his father, the emperor, that he was still too weak to occupy such a high post. The father smiled bitterly. He believed that Paramal had been an envious child since childhood, and he should have a serious talk with him. Aemon said nothing. He thought his father knew nothing of his youngest son's intentions, but he did not want to be the man who brought bad news. After some time, the emperor fell asleep, and Aemon left his bedroom so that his father could rest peacefully. In one of the rooms of the palace, the emperor's eldest son came across his younger brother. Paramal noted that his father had been calling Aemon to him often lately, as if he was preparing him for something. The second prince wondered what trick Aemon had used to gain his father's favor. Aemon replied that tricks were Paramel's specialty, and that he should know about them better than anyone else. Paramal chuckled and asked Aemon who the young lady was that was with him at the ball. He thought she was pretty, but it was doubtful that such a girl would be sincere with Aemon. The first prince clenched his fists until his knuckles creaked. He had wanted to punch his brother for a long time. Then his soul would definitely feel better. Instead, Aemon noted that Paramel should have taken more interest in the names of girls, especially those from noble families. Paramal countered that while Aemon was idle and memorizing girls' names, he was busy earning merits on the Glior front. This happened according to Paramal, because he is not as useless as Prince Aemon. The first prince replied that if this were so, it could not be that Paramal did not remember the lady who had accompanied him to the ball that day. Paramal himself gave that lady the nickname Crow for her dark wig and aloofness. How could one forget that? The second prince was puzzled and surprised that the lady was Natalie Ailsden, for she now looked and behaved quite differently. Aemon confirmed his guess, said that he was leaving, and asked him to convey his greetings to the empress. Paramal looked after his half-brother, and thought that he was disgusting and that he hated him terribly. The second prince's thoughts turned to the girl who had accompanied Aemon today. Could she really be Natalie Ailsden? Then the changes in her appearance were almost unbelievable. The second prince knew that Natalie wore a black wig, but he could not even imagine that the girl's own hair was so incredibly beautiful, and that she herself behaved much more confidently. Paramal decided that since Aemon was showing interest in Natalie, it would be funny to steal her away from the first prince right from under his nose. The second prince was determined to make Aemon realize that he was not allowed to have anything at all in this imperial family. Natalie was riding in the carriage with her father, and thought that she did not remember the last time she was alone with her father. She was so embarrassed that she wanted to fall through the ground. Father sternly said that Natalie attracts trouble, no matter where she is. Natalie replied that what happened to her today was not done on purpose. However, if her father wants to blame her, then Natalie is ready to apologize in advance, although she did nothing of the sort. The Duke was silent for a moment and asked if it was true that Natalie was not hurt anywhere. His question surprised the girl. The girl replied that she had simply tripped, but nothing special had happened, and she noted that her father was worried about her. The father asked whether Natalie had decided not to wear a wig anymore. Before, she even slept in it and was nervous in his absence. The girl replied that she no longer needed him because she had understood all the charm of being herself, and she would walk like that. The Duke smiled sadly and said that without the wig, Natalie looked very much like her late mother. It seems that the old Duke was very sad about his wife, who had died early. But why then did he neglect his daughter so much? Natalie found it strange that her father mentioned her mother to her for the first time in many years after the funeral. It seemed as if his daughter's fair hair had stirred up memories of his wife and the Duke. Natalie paused and asked where Sharon was now, and if she was okay, if she was badly hurt. The Duke replied that Sharon had suddenly, for no apparent reason, fainted right there in the ballroom. The girl found it strange that despite the fact that Sharon became ill, her brother and father came for her. It was strange. The Duke said he was tired of scandals and asked Natalie not to complicate his life even more with her antics. Natalie, in the Duke's opinion, could not even imagine how much she and Anatole had done to soften her punishment. The Duke wanted Natalie to calmly serve her punishment in the palace, finish the census, and then sit at home as quiet as a mouse. Then the father and daughter rode on in silence until they reached the destination of their journey, their family mansion. The wheels of the carriage creaked quietly, bringing to the girl melancholy thoughts about the still worthlessness and transience of existence in this world. To be honest, it was easier for Natalie to bear Anatole's grumbling and swearing than her father's silence. Natalie asked permission to go upstairs to her chambers, and her father could find out the details of her misadventures from her brother. The butler entered the room and reported that he had called all the capital's doctors. Natalie decided that Sharon was indeed seriously injured. The Duke sent Natalie to his room and said that he would send doctors to her private quarters. The girl did not expect that her father's care would this time be expressed in such a cool event. The doctor asked for Natalie's hand to measure her blood pressure, but the girl said that she was completely fine and did not need an examination. The doctor insisted on measuring her blood pressure, and Natalie very loudly protested against his actions. The doctor convinced the girl that anger would only harm her health, and therefore he asked her to calm down. Natalie was outraged. This doctor was trying to force medications and treatment on a completely healthy person. What else would he expect? The maids entered the room and asked to clarify when the miss would like to wash herself. They were told that today she was taking water procedures in her room. Natalie was very tired, and she just wanted to be left alone to sit in silence. But here, one or another, it was irritating. For a whole week after the ball, Natalie was not allowed to take a step out of her room. At first, the girl decided that they were worried about something else after the attack. However, upon reflection, Natalie realized that they were simply trying to prevent her from meeting Roger. Anatole told his father that he could no longer live like this. His strength and patience were running out. How long must he stand aside and watch his beloved girls suffer? The Duke reminded his son that everything they do is only for them and their prosperous life in the future. Anatole did not understand how it was possible to allow Sharon to remain sick and not pay attention to Natalie, who was so thirsty for their love and communication, and say that all this was for the sake of the girls. This did not fit into the head of the young Duke at all. He obeyed his father, but did not understand his plan. Anatole asked his father what was the point of their actions if the girls were unhappy. The Duke asked his son what he meant by unhappy. Had he forgotten that his pity had almost killed them both? Once upon a time, in childhood, this really happened. Anatole remembered this incident as if it had happened an hour ago. The boy shuddered as he recalled finding two nearly lifeless bodies in the mansion's garden. The young Duke had no more arguments and stood silently, showing his complete capitulation. The old Duke said that the conversation was over, and Anatole could go, since he had nothing more to say. The door closed behind his son, and the Duke was left alone in his office. Now he could relax a little. The man sighed heavily. He walked for a long time from corner to corner of the spacious room, until his gaze fell on the table where there was a photo of his late wife. The Duke brought the image dear to him, closer to him, and a stingy male tear fell on the frame of the portrait. The Duke mentally reported to his wife that he had fulfilled her dying wish and taken care of Sharon. The Duke wondered if his wife had foreseen that everything would turn out this way, that this was all part of her plan. Still, the Duke doubted. Maybe he misunderstood his wife's will and made the wrong choice. But what should he do then? During the entire next week, neither her father nor Anatole visited Natalie in her room. The girl was tired of sitting locked up. She was bored and sad, and she wondered why Anatole had gotten a scolding from his father this time. Although, what is there to guess about? Of course, it's all because of her. Or rather, because they never tried to understand her. The girl thought that she had missed the chance to meet Roger because of her imprisonment in this house. But the Duke of Crawford had simply left the capital for a while. But Natalie was still very worried. Soon the notice arrived that the study group was gathering, and it was necessary to appear at the palace. Natalie was not guilty of anything, and believed that she was locked in without reason. She tried to call her father or Anatole through the maids to get permission to leave. However, the girl constantly received the answer that the Duke and his son were very busy now, and they did not have time to visit her. It was all a lie. Natalie knew that they visited Sharon in her room every morning and every evening. Anatole and his father walked with Sharon in the park, despite the fact that the girl was forbidden to get up. There is only one reason why the family turned their backs on her. They just don't want to deal with her anymore. Ever since Natalie was little, she has done everything to get her family's attention, but in return, she has received only coldness and indifference. Now, Natalie realized how stupid it had been for her to try to please them all these years. It's all very stupid, since all of them are not even the goal of the game, but ordinary NPCs that are created only for a beautiful background. Natalie reasoned that she shouldn't care, but she realized that she was very upset, and therefore concluded that she had become too fused with this body. Meanwhile, a notification came that they would soon be assembling a study group for this year. Next week, Natalie will go to the palace, and it looks like she will meet Eamon much earlier than Roger. That day, Natalie was worried that Roger was in a bad mood because of Anatole, and therefore he did not want to see her either. However, to her great happiness, everything was completely different from what she had already managed to imagine. The gamer thought that if everything continued to move at the same pace, she would figure it out by the end without any problems. If the events in this world correspond to the game's storyline, they will meet Roger very soon. The Duke of the North was the man with the highest level of complexity among all the leading male characters. There was another main character in this game, Igor. Natalie also really needed to meet him. A week later, Natalie arrived at the Imperial Palace and was asked to choose either the Imperial Code of Laws or a history book to census. Natalie was indignant. What was the point of offering if there were only history books left? The girl was going to visit the Imperial Library first to copy everything, and before leaving home, she would ask the librarian to check everything. If the librarian is not too picky, then everything will be fine with her, and she will be able to calmly find out everything that interests her. The girl had read the history textbook so many times that she knew it by heart, so she was going to finish it quickly and meet Eamon. The history textbook seemed strange to Natalie. It originally included the story of the creation of the world, followed by the emperor's achievements in chronological order. Natalie flipped through the book several times and realized that everything in it was described differently than she remembered from the game. The girl approached the librarian and asked him if he thought the history textbook was a little inaccurate. The attendant replied that he didn't care. Natalie just had to rewrite it, and that was it. She didn't need to worry about it anymore. Natalie didn't like that the librarian was lying to her and didn't care at all about what was written. Thanks to the fact that she managed to accumulate a little karma in herself, she endured this lady's rudeness. The girl reasoned that something should have changed in the full version, or maybe it was just a system bug. In any case, she needed to finish rewriting quickly. Natalie worked hard and finished early enough, which made her happy. During this time, everyone had gone to lunch, and Natalie decided to go and meet Eamon. The girl went out into the spacious park of the palace and hurried to the prince's chambers, since she was not far from them. The weather was wonderful. The sun was shining warmly, but not scorchingly, and a fresh breeze pleasantly cooled the skin. Suddenly, Natalie heard a strange conversation. They were clearly talking about her, and they were clearly worried about her abilities. The librarian told another girl that Natalie had good instincts, because the book she was working on seemed strange to her. The employee laughed and said that Natalie's book was complete nonsense, and that it shouldn't exist at all. They had slipped her a crazy book on purpose. The second girl asked if there was a rule that a librarian could file a report for careless copying. Of course there was. The other girl replied, and was happy at the thought that Natalie would be properly punished. Natalie was upset. Did these girls really have a reason to hate her so much? The girl did not remember ever causing them real harm. It was sad and a little awkward, but Natalie decided to listen to the conversation until the end, and then decide what to do. The librarian said that Natalie continued to bully Sharon out of envy and hatred, not allowing the brunette to live a normal life. Even then, at the ball, Sharon fainted only because of her. Although the blonde had not even crossed paths with her adopted sister, Natalie realized that these were Sharon's friends, and they decided to take revenge for her, without even knowing the whole situation and Sharon's possible reaction. The girl approached the table and asked those present if Sharon's fainting was her fault. Maybe someone could explain everything to her in detail. Maybe she misunderstood something. The brunette turned around to see Natalie approaching. The girl felt in her gut that the blonde would take revenge on her for what happened at the reception. Natalie slyly asked the girl how it happened that Sharon fainted because of the blonde, since she hadn't even run into her at the ball. The brunette declared that Natalie was to blame for causing a hysterical scene, and the young gentleman Anatole went to her, leaving Sharon to sort everything out on her own. Because of this, the brunette waited in the cold wind all alone, and since her health was poor, she fainted. The girl was not impressed by her interlocutor's words. She is not so obsessed with her sister as to blame herself for her troubles. Natalia didn't call Anatole to her on purpose, and she didn't order Sharon to stand still and not move. If the brunette was cold, she could wait inside. Natalie shouldn't take responsibility for her stubbornness. Natalie thinks this situation is familiar. Once an unfortunate girl dared to insult the crown prince. In her opinion, he is a stupid picture of an ideal man. The crown prince cannot be liked by girls at all. They hang on to him purely because of his status. The girl's interlocutor agreed with her. Everyone knows that the crown prince is a simple puppet in the hands of the imperial family, and women are not so stupid. The prince is handsome, but he has nothing but his appearance. People aren't afraid to talk shit behind others' backs. It's a stupid game, and it really does have a depressing setting, after all. The gamer was the one who could expect that. A brunette friend even baked a lemon pie for Sharon, but because of Natalie, she didn't have time to give it to her. The blonde's interlocutor was indignant. Suddenly, a glass of wine was poured on the brunette. The ruby drink ruined her hairdo and white blouse. A brunette can't be a good friend of Sharon's. The brunette hates lemons, so the interlocutor has absolutely no right to accuse Natalie of anything. Natalie says this kindly so that Sharon doesn't kill her pseudo-friend later, because the brunette is damn picky about food. Brunettes need to keep this in mind, and not only that, if Natalie hears her bad-mouthing her behind her back even once more, she'll get more than just a glass of wine. And as a final touch, to completely humiliate the brunette, Natalie placed a cherry taken from the nearest dessert on her head. The blonde hopes that the brunette has understood everything and will not step on this rake again, so as not to upset both Lady Ailsden. The brown-haired girl's green-eyed friend immediately ran up to her and frantically began to wipe the wine off her. Natalie had never been so frightening and dangerous before. Natalie thought with disappointment that once she got home, she would have to spend a lot of time rewriting the correct book, and a heavy sigh escaped her chest. Her condition was noticed by the second emperor's son. The guy approached Natalie and asked what could be bothering her so much now. It seemed to him that Natalie had handled things very well with that lady, although the blonde had been quite abrupt and rude. But the red-headed one likes fearless and insightful girls. Natalie fits these two criteria of his taste. If he had known about her character earlier, he would have started flirting with her much earlier, so now he wants to make up for lost time. But Natalie didn't like the second prince at all. She removed his hand from her face and moved a decent distance away from him. But the red-headed one didn't notice the girl's mood at all. He continued to claim that he was better than Aemon. The crown prince was chasing skirts, but was completely indifferent to the rest. The blonde called the red-headed guy funny, but not at all in the sense that she likes him. After all, this is not the first time she has crossed paths with him. It was the second prince who called her a crow, which caused the others to mock her, and now he dares to flirt with her, which looks completely ridiculous. But now the prince felt awkward. He tried to brush off this topic. In his opinion, this was a stupid reason to be angry, so he made a feigned apology. But it turned out that this was not the only thing. Natalie knew that the red-headed prince had made a bet with his friends on her marriage. Everyone doubted whether she would be able to get married at all. There is not a single man who could tolerate her hysterics and the constant troubles she gets into. So, the second prince can have no doubt about her. If she wants, she will get married and will not die alone. And if she does not want, then she lives well alone. The prince took a step back. That was then. And now it is now. And at this moment, she sympathizes with him. And he apologized. So everything is fine, and they can forget about past disagreements. Natalie asked the young man to be honest. He doesn't like her at all. The prince just wants to get something that the crown prince has, and it doesn't matter if it's a girl or a throne. The truth began to cut into all the young man's senses. He didn't even want to admit it to himself. He didn't want to admit that he envied his older brother. The prince had already swung at the girl to shut her up, because no one dares to show him his mistakes. But he was stopped by a strong grip on his wrist. One of Natalie's future admirers arrived in time. The blonde didn't come to where Aemon said for a long time, so he decided to check on her. You never know what could have happened. Paramal, the second prince, had no right to raise his hand against Lady Ailsden, who had come to visit. Even a street thug shows more respect to a lady than he does. If we were talking about status, Paramal countered, then Eamon was much closer to a bandit than he was. Natalie gently and condescendingly asked Eamon to leave this conversation because Paramel was not worthy of his older brother's attention. Natalie turned to the red-haired man and smiled predatorily at him, asking him not to forget his brother's advice to be nicer to the ladies. Paramel remained silent in anger and thought that the lowborn did not dare to insult him, the son of the emperor, and he would take revenge on them for this. Aemon promised to report the incident to the imperial chronicler, and the conversation between the prince and Natalie moved to a secluded room over a cup of tea. The prince decided to return to the conversation where he and the blonde had left off earlier. The prince was interested in the fact that he could use the life force that he did not notice in himself when Natalie was within his reach. More specifically, in order to use this power, Aemon and Natalie need direct physical contact, such as holding each other's hands. The intertwining of his and Natalie's hands made the elegant prince blush. Contrary to rumors, the right approach always made him blush. Now Natalie thought that the prince looked even more innocent than in the original game. Perhaps this is one of the changes in the latest version. With Natalie's help, Aemon will be able to present His Majesty the Emperor with a grand gift. From the very first day, the prince never ceases to be surprised by Natalie. He is interested in what the girl will get from helping him. She is of House Ailsden, and therefore has no shortage of money or power. And supporting the second prince in her position is far more profitable and safer. Natalie and Aemon are missing something that no title can give. She wants to get it. That's why she helps the blonde. Prince Aemon wondered what it could be. The imperial family has almost everything, but what exactly Natalie is interested in, he does not understand. The girl did not torment the prince with riddles for long, and said, dreamily breathing into Aemon's face, that they lacked freedom. Aristocrats, particularly the crown prince and Lady Ailsden, are often compared to and criticized by others, such as Natalie and Sharon, Aemon and Paramel. Natalie doesn't want to be compared anymore. She wants freedom. She wants to be herself, without having to look at what the public says. The girl's ingratiating and gentle voice, coupled with her caresses, drowsied and enchanted the prince. Aemon also wants freedom, and that's what Natalie and he will get when they work together. The prince has never experienced freedom or anything like it, so he doesn't even realize what it can be like. The prince's freedom will give him the opportunity to use his powers without Natalie, and the girl will remain by his side until that day comes. The prince's mood suddenly worsened. Did Natalie really want to say that she would leave as soon as everything was over? Such a chain of events greatly upset the prince. Natalie noticed that her words brought the prince mental pain. She did not want to upset him at all. On the contrary, she tried to cheer him up. Natalia can't confirm her departure when she sees His Highness so dejected, so she hastened to refute his fears. She will not leave him anywhere. Exactly after these words, the prince intertwined his fingers with hers, gently but firmly holding the girl's palm. Aemon pulled Natalie towards him, and the suddenness of his actions made her eyes look scared. After all, Aemon hoped that Natalie would continue to stay close to him. Improving relations with the prince was indeed the easiest way. His sympathy level quickly reached the desired 10%. Aemon really didn't want the girl to refuse him her company. Natalia drew attention to his sympathy indicator. The full version of the difficulty level of conquering the prince is about the same, and if you compare it with Roger, the prince falls in love instantly. There are still many things the prince wants to ask the young lady, but right now, there is something more important than his many questions. Aemon invited Natalie to meet a certain person, several people even, the ones who almost killed them. Thanks to His Highness, Natalie was even able to see the underground prison, where ordinary people, even high-ranking aristocrats, are not allowed. However, the prince objected that a beautiful lady should never see a place like this, because once someone is locked in here, he can only leave it feet first. But if the prince and Natalia are together in the same cell, then Aemon does not mind them being put in this terrible place. Natalie didn't like the prince's expression at all, and she showed with her whole appearance that she was about to leave him. The principal hastened to calm the blonde down. He was just joking and regretted his bad joke. As Natalie already knows, They were attacked by hired killers from Glior. Unfortunately, the exact route by which they entered the palace has not yet been determined. But the crown prince has survived so many assassination attempts that he has no doubts about one specific fact. The empress is ready to open the gates even to a murderer and a terrorist if it will help achieve Eamon's death. But this time, to the prince's surprise, the evil stepmother dragged even Natalie into it, although the Aylesden family holds conservative views and will most likely remain on Paramel's side. If it turns out that the current empress has harmed her own supporter, she will be exposed to enormous political risk. So, what may sound absurd on the part of the prince, but he suspects that the mercenaries were also trying to eliminate Natalie. This information shocked Natalie. She can't afford to die and start this whole game over again. She's done too much. The whole country was shocked that Lady Natalie had suddenly acquired the gift of foresight, and Glior could not help but learn of these events. Natalie came to the conclusion that information about future events was best kept secret. If the one with the gift of foresight is a hardened conservative nobleman with a low probability of desertion, then trying to eliminate him would be the most logical move. The prince confirmed the girl's words. It was thanks to her reasoning that he sincerely believed that she, too, could choose her own destiny. Unnoticed during their conversation, they approached a cell in which were two of the people who were going to kill them. The prince calmly looked at the half-dead people lying there. They were able to catch them while they were retreating. Natalie noticed the red hair of one of the criminals. She doesn't know many characters with that hair color. Eamon interpreted the girl's expression differently. He thought that it was very difficult for her to look at this. The red-headed one, at the time of his discovery, already had serious injuries. Due to the red-headed man's injuries, the prince's guards were not even able to interrogate him completely, as he simply did not regain consciousness. It seems that the red-haired man doesn't even need execution. He will simply die a natural death in a cold cell. Just think, Natalie would meet the last main male character of this game just like that, when he would be lying helplessly in the death chamber. The handsome and stately red-haired magician was supposed to appear a little later, and in completely different circumstances. The second prisoner was in no less dire a state, but the guards continued to watch him and the empress, and now the insidious woman was ready to make her next move. The prince drew Natalie's attention to the coat of arms tattooed on the back of the second prisoner's hand. This coat of arms means that the person was recognized by the Emperor Glior himself. It means that this person is incredibly gifted. The more Eamon talked, the louder the gears in Natalie's head seemed to turn, and she began to understand what was happening. If the emperor of the neighboring kingdom sent such a gifted man here, it meant that he wanted him dead, or he wanted to make sure that the prince and Natalie were really dead. Due to its barren lands, the kingdom of Glior decided to focus its policy on military power, and the kingdom grew by invading and plundering neighboring countries. With the Empire of Luxor dividing their borders, the roots of their conflicts ran unusually deep. Glior boasted the greatest military power in the world, but it was not easy to distance Luxor, where many gifted people were blessed by divine providence. Luxor was taken by the strength of an individual, and not by numbers, like Glior. Just when Luxor was about to put an end to this long war, a miracle happened, and gifted people also began to appear in Gliora. A man brought a boy he found on the street to the imperial palace. This boy was destined to change the course of the war. The number of blessed people in Gliora was nowhere near the number in pre-war Luxor. But unlike the Empire, where powers could only be used with divine blessings, the source of the people of Gliora's power was themselves. Without fear of divine punishment, mutants in quotes began to appear, who could freely use their abilities without prayer. Because of this, shock and alarm gripped the Empire of Luxor, and the ruler of Gliora engraved the royal emblem on every person with abilities, thus declaring such people to be a blessing to the kingdom, whether they wanted it or not. Why is Igor, that red-headed prisoner, the man with extraordinary abilities from Glior, now on the verge of death? Well, whatever the reason, Natalie needs him. The key male character of this game is introduced. Another key to salvation from this world. If Igor dies, then it will be impossible to predict what might happen in this world. So Natalie does not need a special reason to save him. Even if this world is inside a game, Natalie's pain feels very real. It was so hard that she wanted to commit suicide. No one should suffer like this. Otherwise, the world would be completely unfair to her, or to anyone else. Roger, a gifted waterbender, suffers from an inability to control his powers. Aemon, the crown prince, who tries to escape death every day and wants freedom. And Igor, a heavy and rude man in appearance, who would simply like to live for himself, without bearing responsibility for an entire country. Natalia's goal is not just to get out of the system. She wants to give each of these men the happy, safe life they truly dream of. Only then will the girl be able to leave this world for real, without feeling any attachment or guilt for the people inside its suffering. The prince noticed the girl's grave condition. He realized that he shouldn't have brought Natalie here. He shouldn't have shown her such a terrible picture. He asked the lady to forgive him and pulled Natalie upstairs. She needed to unwind and stop thinking about the lying prisoners. However, Natalie said that she was completely fine, and he should not worry or try to take her away as quickly as possible. The girl just wants to ask the prince for one very crazy request. She wants to take Igor to her place. One wants power over a gifted person from Gliora, alive or dead, to belong only to her. Lady Natalie asked the prince to entrust Igor to her. Alive or dead, it doesn't matter. She will do everything as she decides. The girl's request caught the prince by surprise. He lost the power of speech and froze without moving. Aemon would like to ask why Natalie would need someone like Igor at all. But since it was her, the prince would not inquire about the real reason for her desire. The young man took a key from his bosom and reached for the lock that secured the prison doors. A couple of deft movements, and the lock yielded to the key, flew off the hinge, and the door opened. The crown prince agreed to hand Igor over to Natalie without any problems. He completely trusts the blonde. Natalie thanked the prince for fulfilling her request and did not even inquire about the reason for such a desire. It turns out that Igor has already been declared dead, so even if he disappears from the dungeon, no one will ask unnecessary questions. Natalie sat down next to the practically lifeless body, carefully took his head, and began to feel his neck for a pulse. Moving her fingers along the man's neck yielded practically nothing. Natalie barely found the carotid artery. Igor's breathing and pulse are barely perceptible, to be honest. It is most likely impossible to pull Igor out of this state. Natalia carefully ran her hand over the red-haired man's chest. She had to make sure he survived. The girl began to urgently think about what she could do and how she could help Igor breathe again. And Prince Aemon watched Lady Ailsden's rapidly changing expression closely. The girl covered the left side of the man's chest with a trembling hand, the one where his heart had recently been beating. The girl's hand was covered by the prince's palm. Since he now possessed the magic of life, he agreed to help Natalie and save Igor. Frankly, the prince admitted, he would have preferred that the gifted man from Glior simply die. The prince reminded Natalie that Igor tried to kill him, and he was worried about what might happen if the fire mage was left alive. Natalie admitted that she wanted to keep Igor alive because she saw him in her dream, and the girl and the imperial family would still need him. The prince breathed a sigh of relief. He had known that something like this would be the cause, so they had no choice. They had to save Igor. Aemon is worried that the criminal might hurt Natalie, and he doesn't want that at all. Natalie was slightly embarrassed by such concern on the part of the heir to the throne. The power of the crown prince can only delay the inevitable. They have about 10 minutes left to transport the magician, and then everything will depend on Igor himself. Finally, Natalie returned to the banquet hall, where she was immediately met by the family's butler. The worker was worried about where the girl had disappeared to. The meeting had long since ended, and you were all very worried when the girl left and never returned. Natalie immediately realized that everyone was worried about the same thing. They thought she was in trouble again, but in fact, everything was fine. Natalie justified her absence by saying that she needed to go shopping to clear her head and get her thoughts in order. The butler began to worry even more. Mr. Anatole ordered Natalie to limit her expenses. She went shopping. Natalie has never been an obedient young lady, so everything is fine, and she is not going to listen to her brother. And yet, this is too much. She needs to at least start listening to her family a little, otherwise everything will be bad. Natalie was outraged. The butler wanted her to return the purchases, and if she returned everything and demanded a refund, the family would be disgraced throughout the capital. The workers carried a pile of heavy boxes, crates, and bags filled with all sorts of things. Dress, hat, and jewelry, Natalie just needs to say, and the prince will take care of purchasing and delivering it all. The main thing is that the box does not attract too much attention to itself, because the main drawer does not contain jewelry. Anatole approached his sister. He was clearly irritated. The young man had a premonition of something bad for a long time when Natalie so easily decided to go to the meeting. In the first second of meeting Kundu, the girl did not even look back at her brother, calmly listening to Anatole's beginning indignation. The brother absolutely believed his sister's story and was very angry because she had deceived both him and their father when she asked them to go to the meeting. Natalie greeted her brother calmly. She was not afraid of him at all. She only asked him not to be angry and to look at the new dress, which fits her perfectly. Anatole hoped that Natalie had stopped imitating Sharon and had grown up. She was still trying to attract her family's attention by making herself look stupid. The girl could not stand the groundless accusation against her from her older brother, so she resentfully parried his words. He did not dare to accuse her of anything because he never paid attention to her. Anatole was not mistaken. As a child, she really did behave like that, being naughty, so that she would be noticed. When she needed the attention of her father or brother, she would deliberately get into trouble, all so that they would notice her. The little girl didn't know how else to get the desired attention from her beloved father and brother. First, her father began to ignore her, and later her brother joined his parent, copying the behavior of the elder Duke of Eilsden. But as soon as she got a little older, even that stopped working, leaving her completely isolated in her own home. Anatole heard that at today's meeting, Natalie poured wine on Sharon's friend, and her family made a big fuss and filed an official complaint. Instead of learning kindness and grace from Sharon, Natalie always starts trouble at every opportunity. The girl was tired of her older brother's accusations, who didn't even know the whole situation, so she directly asked him to stop and shut up. Anatole got furious in response. Natalie didn't dare give him orders. She wasn't in that position. But the girl didn't tolerate it for long and calmed her brother down with a slap. This made Natalie's older brother even more angry. In his opinion, his sister had completely lost her mind. The fight between brother and sister was stopped by the menacing voice of their father, demanding complete submission. The man left the office just in time. His children almost killed each other. Duke Adam was angry with both children. They were already adults, but they continued to butt heads like little children, which was contrary to their status. Anatole began to justify himself by saying that this time Natalie had really gone too far, and if her father allowed it, he would like to teach her a proper lesson. Natalie continued to be angry at who her brother thought he was, that he could raise her. However, the father sternly demanded his son to calm down. He does not know whether this is his son's generosity or stupidity. He will no longer be able to change for Natalie, unless it involves men, marriage, or an illegitimate grandson. Duke Adam couldn't care less about his daughter. Whether she's emulating Sharon, flaunting her flamboyance, or pouring wine on other people, Natalie just needs to be married off to a rich man from a noble family. Let her husband watch over her, educate her, and sort her out. Natalie has already become boring to her father. The only reason she still lives in the Aylesden house is so that she can marry off well and finally be rid of him. Alone with his father in his office, Anatole apologized for the commotion he had caused. Duke Adam interrupted his son's words by tapping his cane on the floor. He had no intention of talking about what had happened at the reception now. Father asked Anatole about Sharon's condition. The weak girl needed care. Her temperature has started to drop. Now she is just resting and sleeping in her chambers, and there is nothing to worry about. From now on, Anatole will be more careful, watch Sharon more, and pay less attention to Natalie. The father cannot blame his son for his kind heart. After all, the blonde is also his dear sister. The young man, like Sharon, should get some rest. He will have free time to look after her while she is sick. But still, the guy should take care of his health, because he will not be of any use if he is tired or sick. The young man immediately agreed with his father's words. Who was he to contradict his elder? Father was already calmly looking at the full moon and thinking about his children, both biological and adopted. The time had come when it was time for the Duke himself to go and rest, so the man headed towards the door to his bedroom. On the door, he found a child's drawing, scribbles he had not noticed before, although he began to remember how they appeared. It was during those times when he was still young and his wife was alive that this image appeared. His beloved wife and little son passed by this door, and witnessed the moment when little Natalie created this drawing. It was a pleasant and warm time when the family was friendly and tender to all its members, and it was then that the little girl created this image. Little Natalie ran away from her mother and took out some pencils to draw a self-portrait of herself and her father on the door of her father's study. The man seemed to have been transported into the past. He literally saw his wife looking for their daughter. The woman in charge scolded her daughter. She should not disturb her father while he was working. The Duke completely forgot about it after that incident. It seems he went too far in pushing away his own daughter. Meanwhile, in his room, Anatole could not find a place for himself. He was very worried about what happened at the reception. After that, there wasn't a single calm day, and lately my father has been in a bad mood in general. The young man began to remember his father's words and Natalie's behavior at the end of the evening. He had already noticed that his sister had been deeply hurt by his father's expressions. He saw how the girl tensed up when she heard her father directly say how indifferent he was to her fate and condition. Anatole also remembers his sister's glove, covered in blood. Perhaps the girl's blood, which really worried the young Duke. The words and behavior of his father at the end of the previous evening were really very cruel. The young man decided to send a doctor to his sister. A man with a heavy suitcase filled with various potions and instruments approached the door to Natalie's rooms. They woke up the doctor just to check on someone, even though he is the family doctor, but it seems that waking a person at midnight is too much. The doctor announced that he was entering Natalie's room and that the young gentleman had sent him. Natalie hurried the man. She was fine, but her patient was in critical condition. The girl didn't know how to bandage Igor's wounds, but she couldn't do anything else, so she asked the doctor to save the guest. The doctor was shocked. He recoiled and dropped the suitcase from his hands. A stranger was dying, the last thing he expected to see tonight. But it makes no difference who is in the room at the moment. He is sick. It is the doctor's duty to help him. A stranger needs treatment. The doctor is obliged to help him. The girl began to beg. If the employee's salary is not enough, then Natalie is ready to pay absolutely any amount, no matter how big. And now, as an advance payment, she is ready to give him one of her new necklaces. The doctor hastened to refuse the offered decoration and decided that he really was obliged to help a man in trouble. But Natalie began to worry. Was the necklace not enough? Then she was ready to pay any money later, as much as the doctor wanted. If only the man would save her new acquaintance stranger. It was very lucky that the doctor came now. It turns out that it wasn't about money. The doctor opened his suitcase and began to treat the wounds and heal Igor. He really is a doctor and took an oath to save everyone who needs it. And technically Natalie is still his employer, so he can't refuse to treat anyone. Well, it was the head of the family who hired him, so theoretically he could have been outraged and refused to treat Igor. Natalie immediately seized on these words, which meant that the doctor had locked her here on her father's orders. In any case, this is not the point now. The doctor asked for a delay. The man is interested in where this person came from. But the fact remains that Igor is still alive in this condition and is a real miracle. Now Igor is unconscious, and his body temperature is critically low, as if he is already a corpse. Although his breathing and pulse are still present, this cannot be explained from a medical and scientific point of view. Natalie immediately realized that it was most likely due to Prince Amon's strength and the fact that they had healed Igor together. Not getting acquainted with red hair will not be able to hold out in this state for long. You need to urgently look for a way to save it. And it's not that this method doesn't exist. It's very difficult to achieve in their situation, but the main thing is that it exists. If they had Chaim's herb, Igor could have been cured quickly, painlessly, and efficiently. Chaim is translated from ancient times as a miracle. This herb provides immediate restoration of vitality to people with abilities. The power of this herb Chaim is so powerful that it is called a gift from the gods. And how could Natalie forget about this plant? Because she even knows where to get it. The girl immediately jumped up to go get this grass. It would be more than enough for salvation. The doctor sadly put his mistress down. To his great regret, the herb Chaim could no longer be used. These words shocked the girl. She thought that perhaps the herb Chaim was equated with a drug or something similar. Perhaps she started to cost too much, but she has enough money to buy at any price. It would be absolutely wonderful if you could solve the purchase of the herb Chaim with the help of money or connections. But the last petals of these herbs disappeared many years ago, and it no longer exists in this world. Natalie asked the doctor what he meant by the herb kayam no longer existed. The herb kayam was rare in the past and grew only in certain places. This medicine was always sold at a very high price. However, about 2 years ago, a huge tragedy occurred in the field of botany and medicine. A strange disease, a plant virus with an unknown cause, began to destroy grass and hayam across the continent. Even on the outskirts of Glior, which are known as the native habitat of this grass, it was completely destroyed. This is such a serious problem that even the Duke himself was deeply concerned, and at that time, he personally went in search of this herb. 2 years ago, Sharon was seriously ill. It was surprising that she recovered so quickly, considering how serious her condition was. With the help of Khayyam's herb, even the most dangerous cases can be cured. A chain of thoughts formed in Natalie's head, which led her to an interesting conclusion. The Duke must have managed to get hold of some of Khayyam's herb, and it is possible that some of it is hidden somewhere in this estate. Due to Sharon's poor health, she still needs this herb, and for her sake, the Duke most likely hid the herb somewhere here. At this time, the doctor sadly reported that he had done everything he could and had undertaken all possible methods of treatment. Most likely, Igor will not be able to survive this night and will die at dawn. Natalie thanked the doctor for his help and sent him on his way. She would manage on her own from now on. The doctor didn't know why she needed this strange man, but it would be better for Madame Natalie not to get involved in this. Judging by the marks on the stranger's body, he is from Glior, and also gifted. Communication with a person from an enemy country will not bring anything good. If the Duke or the imperial family finds out that the blonde helped Igor, no one will be pardoned. The Duke executes both the doctor and his own daughter in order to avoid problems with the law and the authorities. However, it was hard for the doctor to see Lady Natalie so desperately begging for help. After all, live and learn, but die a fool, thought the doctor, and decided that he was a doctor, and that was the end of his business. The girl was still sitting next to the practically dead Igor, gently pouring mana into him. Natalie asked the man not to die. He would be useful to her, the prince, and both countries. Even if they miraculously save Igor, without Khayyam's herb, he will still die. His body simply won't withstand it. Igor was born with extraordinary magical powers. Since childhood, he has been able to control all the elements. His power is much more powerful than divine abilities, so society calls Igor the devil, fears him and hates him. Such a huge and overwhelming force reflected on Igor's mind. When he went beyond his capabilities, he lost consciousness. For people like him, Khayyam's herb was more than just a cure. It was a lifeline. And now Natalie finally sees the whole picture. Igor is in this state because Khayyam's grass has almost completely disappeared. Natalie needs to find this herb before sunrise, and the vast size of the estate doesn't make the task any easier. In this huge estate, you can hide a small plant anywhere. Natalie's late mother loved flowers very much, and all of them were taken from the greenhouses located in the garden. Most likely, the Duke hid Khayyam's herb in one of his late wife's greenhouses. The girl can't just watch Igor die right before her eyes. She can't lose one of her keys to freedom. Having endured more than 20 years of pain, barely standing on her feet, and only now Natalie realized that all this was inside the game. She cannot afford to go back to being a helpless baby and endure all that pain and loneliness again. She doesn't want to start all over again and lose the level of development she has achieved so hard. She can't repeat the same mistake again. The deeper her despair, the clearer the insinuating voice sounds, and in her head, the voice keeps saying that the only one who matters here is Sharon. No one would ever rush to look for Natalie if she disappeared right now. Everything in this estate was made just for Sharon, although she appeared here a long time later, after Natalie was born. The blonde cannot forever rely on the main characters, who are supposed to save and protect her. Now she must also save them. For herself and her life, she has changed a lot after she remembered her first life. She is no longer the whiny little girl who tried to imitate Sharon in everything for the sake of attention from her father and brother. It took her a long time to get this far, and she's not giving up now. After her mother's death, the Duke had always kept one of the greenhouses in perfect condition. Now her eyes were open to the truth. Previously, she thought that it was only because of longing for his beloved wife that the Duke kept the flowers and greenhouse in perfect condition. But now, looking back, his ban on entering the greenhouse begins to have a completely different meaning. The Duke tried to hide the place where he secretly kept the miraculous herb of Chaim, a divine medicine that could heal everything. One of the many things the Duke missed when he tried to hide the herb was that Natalie often spent time in the greenhouse with her mother. The girl was very attached to the woman, so she happily tended the flowers with her, listening to her mother's stories. Natalie's father probably never knew that the girl was a frequent guest in the greenhouse. Her mother told her about the blonde's secret when she was very little. Consciously, Natalie remembers that the Duchess is just a character in the game. Many years next to her made the blonde become attached. And right now, something she would never have thought, the Duchess helped her, even though she was not there. Natalie needs to get back to Igor as quickly as possible before the sun finally rises. And there was very little time left before sunrise. The sun had already illuminated the estate with a pink light. The girl, not caring at all about secrecy, quickly flew into her room, loudly slamming the door. She clutched the treasured herb tightly to her chest as she ran towards the unconscious man. If only it wasn't too late, she thought, and she began to feel Igor's pulse. A relaxed sigh escaped her chest. Her pulse, although weak, was there, which meant she had made it in time. Igor must take a bud of the herb of Chaim to survive. The girl began to try to shove the inflorescence into Igor's mouth, but the man was unable to even open his mouth, and so the flower simply fell out of the girl's hands. The man is unconscious, so it is almost impossible to feed him anything. Natalia asked the unconscious Igor for forgiveness and took advantage of the only possible option. She really wants the man to survive, so she gives him the medicine with a kiss, forcing him to finally swallow the flower with a light blow to the throat. Once upon a time, Igor was a little boy, and he remained a child in his subconscious because he lost his childhood too early. Red-haired was a very nice and kind child, so he was attracted to the wounded sparrow, the closest one on the ground. Suddenly, a blue-haired child appeared behind her boy. The unfamiliar boy asked if Igor was scared, but Igor was scared. Because of the horror he had experienced during the war between Glior and Luxor, the red-haired man couldn't stand it when someone approached him from behind. However, Igor thought the voice from behind him was familiar, so he raised his huge red eyes to the stranger and asked his name. The blue-haired boy's name was Er, and he was Igor's second personality, born from his fears and experiences. Igor must accept Yar in order to continue living a normal life and not look back. The power pouring out from Er frightened Igor and made him freeze while his new acquaintance did his magic. As dawn broke, the red hair gradually turned blue, and Igor's consciousness changed. The young man opened his blue eyes now and began to look around. He did not understand how he ended up in this place. However, he felt a weight on his chest and looked down, where he found a sleeping girl. The man hurried to wake Natalie and ask what she was doing next to him and why she was sleeping so peacefully. Another second later, the man realized that he was naked to the waist, which embarrassed him greatly, especially because of the presence of the lady. Half asleep, Natalie at first did not understand where her interlocutor was getting such questions and worries from, so she simply looked at him with her sleepy eyes. Igor was now behaving completely differently and looked the same. Tears welled up in his eyes. He did not understand what had been done to him. Natalie thought she was still sleeping. She fell asleep with Igor, and then woke up with someone she didn't know. Igor looked slightly different. He had a different hair and eye color, but otherwise the same man was in front of the girl. True, he was softer and more vulnerable. Natalia came to the conclusion that this was definitely not Igor. He would never show her such emotions. The girl kindly asked her new acquaintance what his name was and how he was feeling. The man cleared his throat awkwardly and sat up, adjusting the bandages on his neck. He still didn't trust and was afraid of Natalie, but he gave his name, continuing to look awkwardly at the girl. He is clearly more emotional than Igor. Natalie listened attentively and looked at Er. It was the first time she saw two people living in one body at once. Natalie asked what was the last thing Er remembered, but the young man wiped away his tears and turned away from the girl. Igor told him not to blab too much, but Natalie persistently continued the conversation about what Er meant when she said that Igor told him not to tell. Natalie thought that everything that was happening was nonsense. In front of her was a completely different person. She was really interested in who he really was. Yara was again frightened by Natalie's serious tone. The man hid his eyes with his hair and apparently began to cry again. ER called Natalie little sister and asked her for forgiveness. He didn't want to upset or anger her. Natalie thought that the man had hit his head or gone crazy, although he seemed to be her age. And ER, like a little upset puppy, stood in front of the girl and roared. Natalie decided to leave the showdown for later. In any case, Igor is alive, and that is the main thing at the moment. The girl kindly wiped the tears from her new acquaintance's face, gently persuading him not to be sad and not to cry. Must be in a lot of pain and suffering right now. The wounds on the common body still haven't healed, and the power hasn't returned to balance. But now everything is fine. Natalie has medicine for them, and there is no need to be afraid of her. She just wants to help. Finally calmed down and smiled. He thinks Natalie is good, but in fact they have already met. The last phrase confused the girl. She does not remember meeting the second owner of Igor's body. At that moment, Natalie was with the first prince, and really didn't want to harm her. His task was to kill the prince, they her. Natalie had done nothing wrong, and tried to defend the idea that they needed to lie in wait for the prince later, when she was not around. But the comrade shut the man up and put a knife to his throat. Had to do as the second killer ordered him. The guy threatened to kill if he disobeyed, so the blue-haired man had no choice, and what happened happened. Yar's fellow assassin, Kuhn, ordered him to kill both Natalie and the crown prince, but the man is very glad that the blonde was not harmed. A certain Kuhn gave orders to although in theory, Igor is higher than him in the hierarchy. Natalie always thought that Kuhn was just Igor's pawn. This game is changing more and more. Began to tell something else, with a gentle smile on his face, because he had finally calmed down and got used to Natalie's company. However, he punched himself in the face, and at the same time his hair changed color to red again. It seems Igor returned to his body. Igor returned angry and irritated. He began to scold for chatting with Natalie, because he could have said too much. In Igor's opinion, is a pathetic idiot who was stupidly afraid of a guy with a simple dagger who boasts that he follows orders well. Such a sharp change in the man in front of her made Natalie recoil and press her hands to her chest. She was definitely afraid of Igor like this. The red-haired man, looking down aggressively, addressed the girl with threats. He really became a real Igor. Igor doesn't care whether Natalie is the prince's beloved girl or not. The blonde didn't dare drag him here, much less talk to him in such a frivolous tone. The girl grabbed Igor's hand, which was dangerously close to her neck, and rudely began to justify herself. She is no one's lover. She is simply Natalie Aylesden, and she does not wish Igor any harm. So she, as politely as the situation allowed, asked Igor to remove his hands and behave appropriately. A light of madness lit up the man's eyes. Natalia turned out to be much funnier than he expected, so he let her go. Natalie said that she actually saved his life. Igor could have been more loyal and grateful to her. Igor agreed with the girl and leaned towards her face. Whoever she was, the man still wanted to know why she dragged him into her chambers. If Natalie doesn't tell the truth, Igor is ready to finish her off here and now. But Natalie wasn't at all afraid of this threat. She showed with her whole appearance that Igor can threaten anyone, but not her. Suddenly, a voice of one of the maids was heard from the door. She heard a conversation and the sounds of a fight starting and became worried. The girl can't let anything happen to Mrs. Natalie, so she wants to hear her voice. Igor looked around angrily at the sound of knocking and the voice of the maid. He was talking here, and some maid dared to interrupt him. But since the blonde did not expect the presence of the maid, and because Igor was hanging over her, the girl was unable to utter a word. So the maid announced that she was coming in and pulled the door handle. If Natalie was silent, then she would come in and check. Igor pushed the blonde away from himself and stood in front of the door. The unfortunate maid had incurred the wrath of the great magician Glior. Igor didn't plan to turn this area into a mass murder site, but only because it would be a hassle to clean up later. The magician's red eyes flashed lightning. It was clear that he would not stop at verbal threats alone. Natalie was afraid that the servants would hear Igor and covered his mouth with her hand. Otherwise, he would definitely give her away with his loud cries. The girl put her finger to her lips and ordered the magician to be quieter and not show in any way that he was there. Igor did not expect such treatment. He was used to everyone being afraid of him and obeying him. The girl turned to the maid who had suddenly entered the room and asked when she had told her that she could enter her mistress's room without permission. The Duchess was irritated by this behavior of the servants, and she ordered them to stop disturbing her without reason and to go about their business. The maid did not expect such a cold reception from the mistress and was confused. The girl said that she heard strange loud sounds from the room and came in here because she was worried about the mistress. Natalie wondered, since when did the servants even bother about her? The girl should get it into her head that no one has the right to approach her room without permission. Igor, who found himself an involuntary witness to this dialogue, was puzzled. He could not understand the behavior and intentions of this strange girl. The maid apologized for the mistake, wished the lady a good rest, and hurried away. A little later, another maid, consoling her, reminded her that she had been warned earlier that she was not encouraged to go to Lady Natalie's room without being summoned, and that she should be grateful that she had gotten off so easily. The maid tried to explain that she was really worried about Lady Natalie, since she had known her since childhood, and had changed a lot recently. The second servant girl agreed that Lady Natalie was behaving strangely, to say the least. The girls decided that in principle, there was no particular problem in this. Lady Natalie had always been hot-tempered. It was no wonder that everyone didn't like her. The maids went to Lady Sharon's room. Natalie was sure that if someone entered her room and made a noise, Igor would kill everyone in this mansion. The bloodthirstiness of this side of the magician's personality left no doubt about his capabilities and intentions. Natalie did not wish death, neither for her family nor for her servants. She did not want her home to be filled with mountains of corpses. The young Duchess could not allow mass murder to occur, so she was rude to the maid and sent her out of the room. Igor was perplexed as to how he managed to get back to normal. It seemed almost impossible. The magician asked the girl if she had really used that herb of chimes and where she had gotten it from. This herb had long since disappeared, and even he himself could not find it anywhere, no matter how hard he tried. And here it was, and it was clearly not a fake. Igor could not understand how the girl knew that he needed this particular herb. In any case, in his opinion, she did not at all look like an ordinary aristocrat. Igor grinned ironically and asked if he was reasoning correctly and what Natalie could answer him about all this. The girl had thought of this move a long time ago and told Igor, like everyone before him, that she sees prophetic dreams. In her dreams, she saw Igor and knows something about him. Not everything, of course, but she has the basic information. Whether to believe Natalie or not, Igor had to decide for himself, while prophetic dreams, as justification for sources of information, still worked without fail. The magician replied that Natalie had given him a funnier answer than he expected to hear, and therefore he would listen to her again. Igor thought that Natalie saved him only because the prince ordered her to do so, and she cannot disobey the heir to the throne. Natalie clarified who Igor meant when he spoke of the prince, Amon Luxor, or the second brother. The magician decided that Natalie was working with Cone, which is why he thinks he is an ally of the second prince. This assumption was ridiculous and offensive to Igor. The magician despised the second prince and was entirely on the side of the first. Igor would not, for all the treasures in the world, side with such a coward as the emperor's youngest son, even though he was his legitimate offspring. The magician suggested that Natalie's prophetic dreams did not give her access to complete information. Natalie admitted that, to be honest, she didn't like any of the princes, but if she had to choose, she would prefer her older brother. The girl clarified that this choice does not speak of a personal attitude. She makes it only because King Gliora wants to put an end to this long war. Neither empire gained anything from the war, and both countries lost far more than they gained. Having clarified this point, Igor suggested moving on to another question that interested him no less than the first. Maga was interested in which of the two princes vying for the place of the next emperor of Luxor was capable of putting an end to this long war, who was ready to negotiate peace. Natalie had to express her opinion on who was better to bet on, the eldest illegitimate prince or the youngest offspring of the emperor. Which of them will end the war and extend a hand of friendship to the emperor of Gliora is the priority question. Igor believed that Natalie probably already knew the correct answer to this question. She just didn't want to talk. Natalie believed that there was no doubt that Eamon Luxor would become the next emperor of Luxor. This guy has not only strength, but also all the qualities suitable for successfully governing a country. King Gliora values not only strength, he truly wants to put an end to this terrible war. The ruler of Gliora believes, and quite rightly so, that if Paramel becomes emperor, the war will never end. Igor said that the ruler of Gliora has high hopes for negotiations with the emperor's eldest son. That is why the king ordered Igor to contact the first prince, in whom he believed more. Natalie asked to answer why Kone attacked Igor and the first prince and ended up in prison with them. Igor said that it all started from the moment they crossed the borders of the Luxor Empire. Since they entered the empire, the magician's condition began to worsen. Kone tried to figure out what was happening to the magician, why he was in such a state. Igor ordered Kone not to approach him, as his condition could lead to an unexpected and unpleasant outcome. Magic raged both around Igor and within him, but he was unable to rein it in and calm it down. Vortexes of magical power curled into spirals, compressing reality and turning time. The magician said that, in the end, his mind could not withstand the power of magic, and he went mad. The consequences of this rampage were so catastrophic that he lost consciousness. Kone was completely horrified by the situation that had arisen, and most likely he, too, had gone slightly mad. Kone kept asking the mage if he was okay, or if something was wrong, as if it wasn't clear from the surrounding events that order was far from being there. At this time, some kind of half-idiot with the soul of a butterfly and eternal tears in his eyes was born inside Igor. Natalie asked if Igor really called his second personality, this good-natured ER, a half-idiot. Igor emphasized that he had told Natalie too much as a token of gratitude, and now he also wanted to know something about her. The girl asked what exactly Igor was interested in and asked him not to come so close to her again. The magician replied that he was not interested in anything in particular and that he was not going to pry any of her girlish secrets out of her. But he really wants to know why Natalie's estate is storing Heim's herb, which is becoming increasingly rare. The magician could only assume one thing: someone here was seriously ill, and he was right as never before. Igor was sure that his guess was correct. He didn't even doubt it. It couldn't be otherwise. Otherwise, the grass would have been sold. The magician claimed that Natalie looked like a completely healthy girl, so someone else was sick. The lady replied that she had an adopted sister, and she was very ill, and Natalie used the herb to make a medicine. The magician laughed loudly and asked if Natalie had really tested her potion on him as an experiment. The magician suggested that Lady Sharon was not so dear to Natalie, since she was risking her life so much. The magician probably laughed. Natalie doesn't like her sister at all and doesn't get along with her. Natalie replied that Igor was wrong. She did not feel any hostility towards Sharon at all. The magician asked the girl what she would do if her potion led to the death of her sister. It was absolutely true. Before Natalie regained her memories, she didn't like Sharon at all. The foster sister was everything that Natalie herself was not. It seemed that everyone loved her simply for being who she was. Just recently, Natalie was convinced that Sharon was better and more beautiful than her, and that she had everything that Natalie did not. The girl envied her adopted sister. It seemed that she had everything, while Natalie was deprived of nature and people. The death of her mother devastated Natalie. No one could fill that place. Over time, the hole in her soul grew bigger and bigger. The despair from loneliness turned into hatred for Sharon. Sharon was kind to Natalie, but for some reason, her good attitude always ended in something terrible. I remember one incident when both girls got sick. Sharon really wanted her and Natalie to get better quickly so they could go for walks with her brother Anatoly again. Natalie fully supported Sharon's intentions, since walking with her brother was much more fun than being sick and taking various medications. At such moments, their relationship seemed almost friendly. At least Natalie's hatred and hostility subsided, and it seemed to the girl that they were all one big family. Natalie was ready to swear before any deity and on any altar that no matter how much she disliked Sharon and how much she was angry at her, she never wanted her dead. The girl continued to pour out her soul to the magician and said that at that time, she was going to use her power to remove Sharon from their family. Igor was relaxed. It seemed like he wasn't listening at all to what the girl was telling him, but in fact, he was following her story very carefully. Hearing about the power, the magician perked up and asked what kind of power exactly Natalie was talking about. The young duchess interrupted her story and replied irritably, so that Igor would not pretend not to understand what was being discussed. The magician became angry and asked whether the lady even understood what she was talking about, or whether it was all just social chatter for her. Lady Natalie gave him the same furious look, filled with the same level of power as the magician, and said that if anyone understood what she was talking about, it was him. Moreover, the girl noted, that was precisely why she saved Igor and did not leave him to inevitable death. And now he sits before her alive and well, but for some reason is not ready to feel gratitude. Natalie did not hide the fact that with Igor's help, she wanted to avoid the future she saw in her dream, and she needed him for exactly this. The magician did not trust Lady Natalie and did not want him, along with all his powers and abilities, to be used for her own purposes by some aristocratic girl. Natalie understood this and announced that their cooperation could be mutually beneficial. Igor would also need her, and not sometime in the future, but right here and now. If the magician wants to stay alive, then he needs Kym's herb, and only Natalie can get it for Igor. The girl swore that she would not let anyone die. She did this not only out of humanity. The death of the main characters catastrophically lowered the gamer's rating. Of course, Igor had no idea that he was actually an NPC in a popular game. The magician thought about the girl's words. There was no other way out. He had to trust her or just use her. Natalie extended her hand, wanting to cement her cooperation with the magician with a friendly handshake. Igor took advantage of her trust and unexpectedly pulled the girl towards him. As a result, they fell to the floor, and Natalie found herself in a strong male embrace. The girl buried her face in the man's muscular chest. The guy smelled quite pleasant, and Natalie did not feel any disgust. However, this did not exclude the possibility that the girl was outraged by the mage's licentious behavior, although what can you expect from someone who is psychologically unbalanced? Igor had no intention of letting go of his prey. He laughed merrily and declared that he had not expected that Luxor would be so interesting. The magician was glad that he decided to come here, but he was no longer interested in the prince. What he offered was boring and uninteresting. Igor became interested in Natalie and the events happening around her, and he agreed to fulfill Natalie's request. The girl did not expect that it would be so easy and quick to come to an agreement with Igor. She had to wait for some kind of catch. The conditions were not long in coming. The magician declared that if she ever betrayed him like Cone, he would kill her with his own hands. The man's strong fingers squeezed the girl's neck tightly so that she felt the first signs of shortness of breath. Natalie calmly endured both this demonstration of strength and the tenacious, fiery gaze of the magician. Not a single muscle twitched on the girl's face. The young duchess answered the magician calmly and with dignity that she would not betray him and that he had nothing to fear. Igor was amazed by the young lady's composure and even slightly confused. He had never met such a brave and impenetrable woman. And what's more, all men gave in to his gaze. The magician compared Natalie's speech to Ear's manner, and he found this parasite absolutely disgusting. Igor felt that Natalie was trying to control him with magic and demanded that she stop doing it. The girl had no intention of stopping and was trying to penetrate deeper into the magician's mind and subjugate him. Igor laughed. Her efforts were in vain. She was simply wasting Chaim's herb reserves, and it was very difficult to get. Without listening to him, Natalie dealt the guy a powerful blow to the jaw, following the rule that there is no defense against a crowbar. The magician screamed in surprise. It was really unexpectedly painful and sharp, especially from such a fragile lady as Natalie. Natalie came to her senses, but it was too late. She couldn't hit Igor. She hit him without realizing her actions, simply feeling that the magician was getting out of her control. However, the guy was right. She didn't have any grass supplies at all right now, and he couldn't be nervous right now. Igor was offended and changed his personality. The magician complained that she hit him suddenly, although he did not do or say anything bad to her. Natalie tried to make her apology sound sincere and asked the magician for forgiveness, simultaneously concluding that from any shock, pain, magic, nervous tension, the personality of the magician changes, and now he is ER. The girl tried to console the magician's new personality. She stroked his cheek and persuaded him not to cry. Natalie was amazed by the magician's ability to have such a split personality, one hypostasis being the gentle and vulnerable ER. The second is the tough and aggressive Igor. Apparently, with such a level of magic, this guy should take Chaim's plant from childhood and constantly. Apparently, the magician once missed a dose, and the side effect caused the magic to go out of control. The magical collapse did not lead to the death of the magician, only due to a lucky accident, but a split personality occurred. This was a side effect of taking the herb. Natalie assumed that when Igor returned, disappeared, or remained in the depths of the magician's consciousness. The girl was interested in how all this actually happens inside the magician, whether Igor and Yara can talk to each other inside the consciousness. Personalities remember each other and the events that happen to them, or they cannot exist in the same body at the same time. Now, Natalie understood why Igor hated so much. What kind of friendship could we talk about if everything was so complicated? Was concerned if everything was okay with Natalie, because the girl had been silent for a long time. The girl looked at the magician and asked him a very tricky question that suddenly popped into her head. Natalie asked if could harm Igor and how he felt about him in general. Was perplexed as to why he would harm Igor or anyone else. The magician was upset, and his sister suddenly began to speak like Igor. Natalie was happy with the guy's answer. Didn't look like someone who could harm Igor. Apparently, he had a block in his mind from harming himself. The girl asked Icarus if he could sit here quietly while she was gone. His life was not in danger. These could be used. Wanted to know where Natalie was going and how long he would have to wait for her return. Natalie explained that she absolutely had to meet someone, but she couldn't do it due to certain circumstances. Didn't want to be alone at all, but he believed that Natalie would return quickly. The girl told the magician that she would tell the servants to put food for him at the door, and he should not forget to eat well. Natalie had to hurry to Roger before the Duke met with disaster and was consumed by his own power. Natalie had to go to him. She couldn't and didn't want to abandon the Duke to his fate. Felt sad, sitting in the locked room alone, and he hoped that Natalie would return soon. The guy was also worried about Natalie. It seemed to him that the girl looked too sad and preoccupied with problems when she left him. Natalie was in a hurry to see Roger, hoping that her guest would be able to maintain his incognito and that she would be able to hide her temporary absence. Now Sharon is sick, and at such moments she does not visit Natalie's room, and her brother and father are indifferent to her and never come into the room. Today, all this was very useful for the girl. Natalie wondered if she should be happy about this. Not long ago, she would have treated such a situation with sadness. But that past, Natalie has nothing in common with the person the girl is now. The carriage crossed the border of the Crawford estate, and immediately the crew was unexpectedly detained. The man who stopped the carriage grumbled that rarely anyone visited the Crawford estate, so he must definitely see who was riding in the carriage. Seeing Natalie sitting in the carriage, he was surprised and glad that she was the young lady who had come to them earlier. Since it is she, he will not worry, and he does not care what her name is or who she is. The main thing is that she is dear to Roger. The guard was more concerned about the young owner of this house and estate, or rather, his physical and psychological state. He was once a cheerful young man, constantly chatting with both him and the coachman. After one terrible incident, everything changed, and the young owner became a completely different person. Natalie assumed that this was a 15-year-old story and thought that she would finally learn more about it. The guard looked into the carriage and saw no one in it except Natalie. This finally calmed him down. The man saddled his horse and announced that he had no complaints against Milady, and at the same time, he asked her to convey his best wishes to the owner of the estate. The girl was left alone at the gates of Duke Roger Crawford's mansion. The wind tousled her hair. For some reason, it was a little creepy. She got here without any adventures at all. The coachman knew from the very beginning who she was, and yet secretly brought her here without resistance or indignation. Now it turned out that Natalie was in debt to the coachman. When, where, and how she would have to pay was unclear, and this could become a big problem. Natalie decided to put the question aside and think about Roger and his fate in this harsh world. What is the real reason why he became a soldier at such a young age and went to the battlefield? Is it really just because of his strength? The girl was at a loss to guess what had really happened to Roger 15 years ago. Absolutely everything in this secret story was strange. Suddenly, the gates opened by themselves, and the girl was plunged into an alarming silence and emptiness. It seemed as if there was no one there at all. A huge, dark mansion appeared before Natalie, where the Duke lived with a small handful of servants, only the most necessary, nothing extra. It seemed that the owner of the mansion did not need not only luxury, but also basic amenities. He did not need anything at all. Roger was completely empty and stood on the verge of destruction. It is not known what kept him in a state similar to life, maybe hope. The gamer thought that the death of such a gorgeous NPC would be a great loss for the game in general, and for her personally in particular. The girl called the Duke by name, and when the man looked back, she felt uneasy again. Everything was back to the original settings, just like on the day of their first meeting. In vain, Natalie looked into the Duke's eyes and searched for at least a drop of warmth and vital energy in them. Roger stood in the middle of the lake and looked at her with an empty and cold gaze. The man's gaze indifferently slid over Natalie and again rushed into space. The Duke nevertheless asked what her business was this time and asked her not to approach him. The lake was much deeper than it might seem to her at first glance. Roger would not want to be the culprit of the death of such a young and beautiful person. This was the only guilt he lacked. The girl boldly approached the very edge of the water and stood there, risking getting not only her shoes, but also the skirt of her dress wet. Natalie hastened to tell the Duke that she was not there on business. She had come to reassure his lordship. Natalie got too close to the water, her shoes slipped, and she fell into the water. Roger didn't have time to do anything, he just shouted for her to be careful. But it was too late. Only when she touched the water did Natalie feel that she was in a slightly altered reality of game time. The goddess of water appeared before the girl, beautiful and all-powerful in her element, and useless in its absence. The girl could not understand what this goddess wanted to tell her. She could only hear the goddess whispering some words. Listening closely, Natalie realized that the higher being was accusing her of the fact that the child that the goddess loved was suffering. The girl only realized that this child was Roger, and for some reason he was suffering because of her. The goddess was still reaching out her hands to Natalie, or was she simply sending her into the depths of the lake, deeper, and further from the game reality and from Roger? The girl began to drown, and it was imprinted in her mind that Roger was suffering because of her. The immersion went on and on. It seemed endless, and at the same time the understanding came that only Natalie could see the water goddess. Roger could not see her. Natalie thought that she didn't want Roger to suffer because of her, and she suddenly wanted to do something good for this man. Immediately, the girl felt how strong male hands grabbed her and pulled her into the air, overcoming the attraction of the water. The water did not want to let her go, or it was the thick material of her travel dress that prevented her from leaving the waters of the lake. Roger's face appeared right before her eyes. The girl thought that this man always comes to save her, and she does not want him to suffer at all. Whether it was reality or a hoax by the water goddess, Natalie clearly felt the touch of the Duke's hot lips on her face and lips. The Duke grabbed hold of the parapet with his hand, and with great effort pulled both himself and Natalie onto the shore, away from their native element. Roger held the coughing girl in his arms and apologized for frightening her with his appearance. She must understand his condition. Lately, the Duke has been finding it increasingly difficult to control his powers. Natalie slowly came to her senses and wondered if Roger really didn't see the water goddess or if he just didn't show it to her. The Duke asked if Natalie was okay, if she was hurt somewhere, or if she had drunk too much water. The girl answered that everything was fine and wondered why only she could see the gods. No explanation came to her mind. The Duke of Crawford informed the girl that he would immediately send her back home to recuperate. Having heard the decisive refusal, Roger was surprised by it and was prepared to object to the guest, and perhaps even forcibly throw her out of the house. The girl stated that she was wet and cold due to the Duke's fault, and now needed to change her clothes and drink some hot tea before she left the estate. If she caught a cold and fell ill, then it would be the Duke's fault. Did he really want to take on such responsibility? Natalie blackmailed Roger. The Duke unexpectedly quickly gave in to the girl's blackmail and agreed to let her stay for tea. Natalie thought he would refuse, since she insisted and appeared unexpectedly, but he agreed faster than she expected. The Duke made excuses that the inside of the house was not in a condition to receive guests, so she should not be afraid. There was nothing to be afraid of. But the Duke was ashamed of the state of the house. Natalie felt like he was talking as if he didn't want to show her the house. Or maybe he just didn't want her to enter the house at all. But it was almost impossible to break Natalie. She declared that the state of the interior was of no importance, since they were just going to have tea. Roger had to give in to the girl and invite her inside his house. Otherwise, she could really catch a cold and get very sick. Natalie looked around the room and realized how neglected the Duke's home was. It was not surprising. In a large estate, there was a meager number of servants. Roger had smashed everything that could be smashed here, and it was pitiful and painful to look at the precious and fragile things that had become unusable due to the fault of the owner of the castle. The girl was sitting on a warm and comfortable sofa. Oddly enough, its upholstery was untouched, and the carpet on the floor of the room did not bear any signs of vandalism. Roger sat down opposite the guest. The man did not understand, but was very interested in the purpose of Natalie's visit to his abandoned mansion. The girl couldn't understand why Roger didn't tell her that he had reached such a terrible state. Roger Crawford, the Duke of the North, was obliged to tell and explain everything to her, and then she would be able to help him.